Hi, everyone. If we can get started, if you can take a seat. Well, thank you everybody for joining us this morning. I want to appreciate, glad to see everybody in person again. My name is Luis Portillo. I'm the president and CEO of the San Gabriel Valley Economic Partnership. I want to welcome you to our 2022 San Gabriel Valley Economic Forecast Summit. I'd like to begin kind of just by acknowledging some of our board members that are present. I want to call them out. Sam Pedroza with City of Industry. I'm not sure if he's here. Renee Bodadilla with City of Montebello. Tom Lentz with Atkinson, Anderson, Loya, Rudd, and Romo. Salvatrice Cuomo with Pasadena Community College. And Dr. Bill Scroggins with Mount Sac. We're also pleased to be collaborating on this event, as we've done for many years, with the College of Business Administration at Cal Poly Pomona. I want to please welcome their dean, Dr. Eric Roland. Prior to joining the College of Business Administration, Dr. Roland served as the interim dean of the School of Engineering and professor of Management and Engineering with the Gallo Management Program at the University of California, Merced. Since graduating with his PhD in Decision Sciences and Information Systems from the Fisher Community College of Business at Ohio State University in 1991, he has been a faculty at the Anderson Graduate School of Management at the University of California, Riverside, the Fisher School of Business at Ohio State University, and a visiting distinguished professor with Antai School of Management and Economics at Shanghai Jiaotong University in China. Eric, if you want to come up, the podium is yours.
Good morning, everybody. Real pleasure to be here again. We kick-started, I should say, this event like 6 years ago with the San Gabriel Valley Economic Partnership, and I want to just thank the San Gabriel Valley Economic Partnership for their phenomenal work that they have put in with us every year for this conference, and co-hosting this forecast with Cal Poly Pomona has been such a pleasure to work with them, and thank you, Luis, for that kind introduction. We do have a number of educational leaders here today as well, and as Luis mentioned, most of them, I'm not going to go through that again. But I want to recognize a few of my colleagues, particularly Leah Dobson, who's the Dean of the Collins College of Hospitality Management at Cal Poly Pomona. We're going to focus quite a bit on hospitality management today. Leah was instrumental today in putting together the program and speakers that you would hear more about that later this morning. And I'm not sure if Leah is here yet, but if she is, thank you, Leah. Yes, thank you. It's been 2 years since we last gathered in person for this forecast. And I'm really profoundly grateful to be with you in person today. It's great to see people, real live people, and just verifying that they actually do exist. It is phenomenal. At Cal Poly Pomona, we haven't really stopped. We've been educating and we've been building leaders for over 80 years. Through social and economic changes and now the global pandemic, we remain very resilient in delivering what we call the learn by doing experiential education that transforms lives, organizations, and societies. Our local, national, and global impact the last 2 years exemplify our enduring commitment to student success and civic engagement. We have graduated just recently over 13,000 future leaders who are trailblazers across Southern California and the country as entrepreneurs, innovators, technologists, and so forth. Our computer science students most of them in the College of Business, won first place at the premier international cybersecurity competition this past January, with over 100 teams, including Stanford and Carnegie Mellon, competing. So we are leaders in so many areas. That's just one example. We have phenomenal students, and those of you who are graduates from there or higher graduates, you know that. They are work ready. At the same time, we have grown our graduate programs from a couple of dozen to about 700 students over the last 4 years. So we're becoming a real power force in the College of Business in terms of graduate education, graduate business education. We have specialty master's programs. In addition to our MBA, we have in analytics. We're starting one in digital supply chain management, and a few of you were missing toilet paper and other things during the pandemic. And those students in those programs are the ones that are going to make sure that your toilet paper is on the shelf during the next pandemic. So we're really proud. We're really proud of our of the work we've been doing. We are having the great fortune of having a lot of corporate partners. If you want to work with us, let me know. Amazon just added Cal Poly Pomona as their educational partner, which is reducing the financial barrier for Amazon employees to simultaneously pursue their academic and career goals while they're working at Amazon. We have other partners we are doing the same with. We're working with Robert Half on creating one of the first certified apprenticeship programs in the state of California, together with the state of California and like I said, Robert Half. We've just launched that program and have had a few people through that already. We are exploring opportunities right now with KPMG on training KPMG consultants on ESG principles, and we want to launch that as soon as we can. So it is really an exciting time for us. As the name of this forecast, this year's forecast, I should say, suggests, Cal Poly Pomona is and always will be open for learning, discovery, and innovation. With 9 colleges, more than 100 degree and credential choices, and over 1,000 faculty and subject matter experts, we are ready to partner with you to continue growing a thriving and vibrant San Gabriel Valley. So that's your invitation. Now, it's my sincere pleasure to introduce your Master of Ceremony, my very, very good friend, Dr. Laura Pahopian. Affectionately, we call her Dr. P. She is a Cal Poly Pomona alumni, and she teaches at the College of Business, and done so for over 20 years. And in addition to teaching for us, she is involved in a lot of other projects with our industry partners, and this is one of those events. And I really want to say to Laura, thank you, because she has been a phenomenal partner for me and for the college and for the community and for our outside partners over the last 4 or 5 years. She also runs marathons when she has time in between. And she is an accomplished chef with her own YouTube channel. And I know, and it's called The Prime Ingredient, in case if you want to go and follow that. And I know that because I do dinners. We host dinners with Laura and with Jeff Cox, my development officer over here, where we actually are serving dinners and Laura is cooking. And we're having a lot of fun doing that. And that's also gives us the opportunity to sample a lot of her food. So I can really vouch for the quality of her cooking. Not that has anything to do with the conference today, but really it shows the multiple talents we have in our people at Cal Poly Pomona. And with that, Laura, I'd like to welcome you to the stage.
Well, hello, and thank you, Eric. And what wasn't said is that I'm also an alum of Pasadena City College. Straight A's, by the way.
All right, Lambda for life.
I know, forever. So I'm pleased to be here with you today. I have done a couple of forecast summits like this via Zoom, and I'm glad to be here in person, seeing all of you with your beautiful faces and dressed up from head to toe. It's awesome. Let me introduce a couple of our key people here today. Born in Zacatecas, Mexico, Victor Gordo immigrated to the United States with his parents as a young child. The oldest of six, Mayor Gordo grew up in Pasadena and is a proud product of the Pasadena Unified School District. When Victor enrolled at Pasadena City College, go Lancers, he became the first person in his family to attend college, continuing his education then at Azusa Pacific University. After Victor undertook the grueling task of attending law school at night at the University of Laverne College of Law while working in the day, he was then elected to represent Pasadena's District 5 on the Pasadena City Council and was to serve on the Rose Bowl Operating Committee, RBOC, and was leading through the stadium's renovation. That was a big task. Yeah, awesome. Victor was elected Pasadena's third citywide elected mayor on November 3rd. Let's welcome Mayor Gordo.
Thank you, Dr. P. Good morning, everyone. That was a very nice introduction. Let me try that one more time. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. All right, now you sound like Lancers. So let me just first welcome everyone to Pasadena City College. I, too, as was referenced, attended Pasadena City College, although I'm going to stay away from the grade announcement. I did not receive all A's while here. I'd like to welcome President Jonas and congratulate her for running such a terrific institution. Let me begin by introducing some of my fellow mayors from the San Gabriel Valley. Angie Jimenez from the city of Montebello. Mayor Aldo Macias Arellano, the Office of LA County. Assessor Jeff Prang's office. Ed Reyes, City of Claremont. And Mayor Bill Rue, Mayor of the City of Montclair. And I'm told there are a number of city council members present from throughout the San Gabriel Valley, including our own Felicia Williams in the city of Pasadena. Please stand and be recognized if you're an elected member of a city council. Let me just say briefly, and then I'll ask President Jonas to come welcome us, but my job is simply to say welcome to Pasadena City College, and remind us that we live in a pretty special place. I always say Pasadena is the center of the universe, but it goes beyond that. It goes to the San Gabriel Valley. You know, there are 31 cities in the San Gabriel Valley, 29 school districts. Pulling together, we can really make a difference for the residents of the San Gabriel Valley. I firmly believe that whether it's education, whether it's tourism, whether it's commerce, if we are working together as a valley, 31 cities, 29 school districts, there's no question in my mind that we can compete with any part of this county or any part of this state. And so I want to encourage all of you to work with the city of Pasadena, to work with the Rose Bowl, to work together as we look to attract large events like the Olympics that will be coming to the United States. And of course the World Cup. I ask for your support. I say let's work together because the impact when we bring the Olympics and when we bring the World Cup to the Pasadena area and to the Rose Bowl will be felt across the San Gabriel Valley. So I ask that we all work together and build from there to ensure that our educational institutions, whether private or public, and our commerce in the San Gabriel Valley are thriving and strong as they can be because we're coordinated and working together. Again, welcome to the city of Pasadena, the center of the universe, and I hope you find today's talk informative. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor. And I am now honored to introduce President Erica Jonas, the 16th president of Pasadena City College, whose remarks will open our summit today. On January 16th, 2019, the Board of Trustees of the Pasadena Area Community College District formally appointed Dr. Jonas. She comes to PCC from the Los Angeles Valley College, where she served as president since August 2014. Prior to her service at LA Valley College, Jonas was executive vice president and accreditation liaison officer at Oxnard College and dean of educational programs at Santa Barbara City College. Welcome, President Jonas.
Okay, folks, those colleges were over a span of 22 years. I can keep a job, I promise. I really can. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. All right, welcome, welcome, welcome. It is great to see you all in three dimensions. It's great to not tell you that you're muted and could you turn your microphone on, and that we get to feed you. That's one of the biggest downsides to Zoom, is that you expect people to come to meetings, you expect them to be engaged, but you don't feed them, and that's a problem. So it's great that we got to feed you. It is absolutely my honor and pleasure to be here to host this, as well as to greet you. I am a huge proponent of working with our economic and workforce development partners. The speech I usually give, or what I always say, is that, you hear a lot about how many students are we transferring to UCLA or USC or to the Cal States or wherever, how many people are we transferring? But the fact is 50% of the mission of the California community colleges is economic and workforce development. And so every community college out there should be engaged in everything that you all are doing, because it's our responsibility to make those connections, to serve the needs of employers, to get our students jobs, introduce our students to work. And so it's through these kinds of events that community colleges get to stay engaged. And so it's awesome to see all of you here. With that, I do want to recognize a few people who are here from the community college world. First, our trustee, Tammy Silver, is here, PCC trustee. Trustee Tony Fellow actually had a conflict with another board meeting come up. Is Trustee Osterling in the room somewhere? He's supposed to. No? Okay, not here. You never want to miss a trustee in the room, just saying. I do want to also recognize from LA Harbor College, we have interim president, Luis Dorado, here. Bill Scroggins from Mount Sac was introduced to you because he's doing double duty here. Thank you, Dr. Bill. But we also have some folks from LA City College. We have the Vice President of Instruction, Dr. Jim Lancaster here, as well as this is a new one, the Vice President of Economic and Social Mobility. I've never heard those two together. Dr. Marcy Drummond is with us. And I also want to recognize, I have a table of folks over here from Pasadena City College who have made the magic happen. Salvatrice Cuomo, who is our Vice President of Economic and Workforce Development. Thank you for making this happen. And then we also have Dr. Micah Young, Dr. Julia Kiotis, Elaine Chapman, Leslie, whose last name is just escaping me. Oh my God. Thank you, Leslie Thompson, Jason Barquero, and Dr. Armine Derderian are also here, as well as Don Lowell back there from our SBDC. Have I missed any Pasadena City College employees? Who did I miss? Oh, I'm sorry, Dr. Francisco Suarez, who is our newest dean of our adult and continuing ed. And I was sitting next to him. How lame is that? Anyway, just again, I want to welcome you here, Pasadena City College. You know, when I was interviewing for this job, folks said to me, well, what are you going to do about economic and workforce development? How do you envision what the role of the college is going to be? And my vision, which I articulated then, and I think we're making some progress on now, is that whenever an employer in the San Gabriel Valley, especially in the Pasadena Area Community College District service area, needed something. I need employees. Either I need to hire someone, I need to train my folks, I need to do something that we instantly came to mind, like, hey, I should call Pasadena City College because I think they can help us. And I think through our work with the San Gabriel Valley Workforce Development, with our role as the fiscal agent of the Los Angeles Regional Consortium, and a whole host of other things, I think we're starting to make that happen. And a welcome invitation to everyone. If you need something, unless it's in Bill Scroggins' area, in which case you need to call him. But if it's in my area, or even Citrus, you're not here, right? You know, call us, because we're here. Call us. Again, have a wonderful morning, and thank you for being here.
It's a guarantee that I will be tripping up those stairs at one point. I'm just letting you know ahead of time. I'm going to be with you here for a while talking to you, so settle in, maybe get another cup of coffee. But this San Gabriel Valley Economic Forecast Summit has been happening since the early 1990s. This is always a special event and unique opportunity to focus on the dynamic economy of the San Gabriel Valley. This event is co-hosted by the San Gabriel Valley Economic Partnership and the Cal Poly Pomona College of Business Administration. Go Broncos. Yes. Two very significant business organizations in the region that are actively engaged with improving the local economy. Many of you here today will be posting on social media, LinkedIn, and the like. We encourage you to use the official hashtag of today's San Gabriel Valley Economic Summit as hashtag SGV Global Force, all smushed together. I have to keep reminding my husband of that, to smush it together, otherwise it doesn't make any sense. Once again, that's SGV Global Force. So we'd like to begin by recognizing and thanking our title sponsor, Mount San Antonio College, home of the Mounties. Welcome, thank you. And our leadership sponsors, the City of Industry, Sanitation Districts of Los Angeles County, Upper San Gabriel Valley Municipal Water District, San Gabriel Basin Water Quality Authority, Three Valleys Municipal Water District, our leadership sponsors. We'd now like to thank our gold sponsors, Ontario International Airport and the City of Pasadena, Visit Pasadena. Our silver sponsors, SoCal Gas, Southern California Edison, Methodist Hospital, Montebello Bus Lines, Pacific Plaza Premier, you go, just keep going. Foothill Gold Line, Fairplex, and Santa Anita Park. Also, a special thanks to San Gabriel Valley Conservation Corps with Norma Quinones. If you're here, just give a holler, Norma. Hi, welcome. They helped with logistics today. We want to give them a special thanks. These sponsors help make this event just completely possible. And please join me again in a huge round of applause to thank them for their support. All right, now on with the show. It's now my pleasure to introduce The first two accomplished speakers today, Dr. Robert Kleinhens of Kleinhens Economics and Cal Poly Pomona, and Bay Netzer of Bank of America. Bay Netzer will address the complicated national and global economic outlook, and there are many issues on the world stage. The Fed, tariffs, instability abroad that can and do affect our local economy here in the San Gabriel Valley. Following her remarks, we will briefly take questions from the audience. And you have cards on the table, white blank cards there, and pens. And I encourage you to take some notes and write some questions down. We will be collecting those so that we can ask our speakers today. We will then hear from Dr. Kleinhens, who will focus on the California and local San Gabriel Valley economy with an eye on economic developments in the coming year or two and what's on the far horizon. So get those note cards out, and we will start with Bay Netzer, who is the Managing Director and Senior Investment Strategist for Bank of America Private Bank. A role in her role, she serves as investment thought leader by presenting the National Chief Investment Office's current market outlook and investment strategy to high net worth clients across the West Division. In this role, she works with her clients, dedicated advisors, and portfolio managers to ensure that top of the house macroeconomic, thematic, and tactical portfolio strategy align with client-specific objectives and customize investment solutions. Bay has been in the financial industry services for over 20 years, having begun her career as financial analyst at Goldman Sachs in New York. Bay also spent over a decade covering global financial news for print, radio, and television outlets in the U.S. and Europe. Bay loves listening to new podcasts and is taking suggestions on what to tune into next. Help me welcome Bay Netzer.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Laura, for the introduction. I think I also should introduce you to my new BFF, Paul Thomas, in the back. He is controlling the audio-visual. Apparently, the restriction by my compliance department to submit a PDF rather than a PowerPoint means that we may have some trouble progressing through the slides today. So if you hear me say, "Next, Paul," that's why. I'm going to give it a quick try. Oh, it works. Or is that you, Paul? We'll just keep going. We'll wing it. We'll see how it goes. So I'm going to walk you through Bank of America Private Bank's economic and market forecasts today. And I think most of what I'm going to touch on is relevant to all of us, both personally and professionally. But just to help me gauge that, quick show of hands, how many of you feel like you're already feeling the impact of 8% inflation? Okay. How many of you are saving for retirement and have money in the U.S. stock market? How many of you have money in bonds? Okay. How many of you have more cash than you need for emergency purposes, but you're concerned about market volatility on the one hand, rising prices on the other, that you're just holding on to it and you're not spending it and not investing it either? Anybody? Okay. Like I said, I think everything I'm going to talk about today will impact all of us, both personally and professionally. Here's the good news. Despite all the volatility, despite rising prices, despite all the unknowns caused by Russia's invasion of the Ukraine, there is a lot you can do to weather the storm. The U.S. economy is actually in very, very good shape today. So no guarantees, but I hope that a lot of what I will tell you today will be reassuring. Okay, so we're already on the slide. the first thing that should reassure you is that this is not just me all by me onesie giving you my rosy picture of the world. Everything I'm going to share with you today is based on constantly updated research from Bank of America Private Bank's Chief Investment Office. There are 240 professionals in that office. They include economists, they include research analysts, and investment strategists like myself. In addition to that, we also have access to the economic forecast and analysis coming from our Bank of America Global Research Office. There are 600 professionals in that office. They are part of our Global Banking and Markets Group. So all of that is to say that we invest a lot of resources into helping our clients make both personal and professional decisions, and everything I'm going to tell you today is a result of that. All right, Paul, can we go to the next slide? So as we talk about 2022, I'm going to tell you that we're going to use a whole new vocabulary compared to the words we used to describe 2021. The key theme in 2021 was recovery. After the deep recession, after the pandemic hit in 2020, in the markets, there was really nowhere to go but up. We had 5.7% real economic growth in the US in 2021. That was the highest rate since 1984. We had 4 straight quarters of earnings growth above 25% in the S&P 500. Now, the last time that happened was 2009 into 2010, also coming out of a deep recession. For the full year, the S&P 500 earnings growth was up 47%. 47% profit growth in the S&P 500. So 2021 was straight up trajectory, right? Recovery, big economic growth, big earnings growth. I think it's pretty clear that 2022 is no longer a story of straight up growth. On the other hand, we're also not talking about a straight downward line. Instead, as you may or may not be able to see here, what we are talking about are shifts, adjustments, and major pivots. Shifts, adjustments, and major pivots. So I'm going to walk you through 4 shifts today that we think will shape 2022. And Paul, we can go to the next slide. Okay, so you can go back, Paul, because I have to just say this. So literally the instructions from my compliance department are to leave this screen up here for a full 30 seconds to allow you to read through it and digest all of it. Paul, go ahead, go to the next slide. If any of you really want to dive in, you can see me afterwards. So there are 2 other problems with the slides I'm going to show you today, and I just want to address them up front because there's a reason I chose to use them. So the first problem is some of them are kind of busy. You won't be able to see all the fine print. The second problem is that things are moving so fast now, particularly since Russia invaded Ukraine, that some of them are going to be out of date. Don't worry about that. I'm just using them as a way of directionally showing you where we came from and where we are going. So this roller coaster graphic that you see here, for instance, this is just a visual timeline of where we have been over the last 2+ years. So it is divided into 5 colors. Each color represents a phase. It starts in 2020. You see the downward line. That is the worldwide collapse of the economy and the COVID pandemic. You'll see that kind of blood red pool of ink over there. That's phase 1. That's called liquidity. Liquidity from fiscal stimulus, liquidity from monetary easing. That liquidity powered us through the recovery phase 2, 3, 4, so the increasingly dark blue colors you see on this graphic. The last phase, phase 5, which we are calling the new frontier, that is what we believe the phase we entered at the beginning of 2022. So when we talk about shifts, adjustments, major pivots, we're really talking about how do we transition into phase 5, the new frontier. And it's a fair question, why do we have to pivot at all if we're on this straight upward trajectory? And the reason is we think there are distinct characteristics right now that are going to force us all to pivot, to shift. So Paul, you can go to the next slide. The U.S. economy currently has 5 very distinct characteristics that we want to draw attention to. They're all up here. I think hopefully you can read them. If not, real quick. Strong GDP growth and capital spending, inflation and rising interest rates, labor shortages and energy dislocations, ongoing coronavirus uncertainty, and trade and geopolitical tensions. So nothing, no, you can go back. So nothing that I'm going to talk about today, these just are, they're not really up for debate. And it's also important to realize that these actually existed prior to Russia invading the Ukraine. We had strong economic growth, but we also had high inflation. We had the Omicron surge. We had trade tensions with China. Now we continue to have strong economic growth. We have even higher inflation. We have a second Omicron variant, for those of you who haven't heard yet, and we have Russia's invasion of the Ukraine. On top of that, we have the Fed now indicating that they're going to be rising rates over the remainder of this year. So the question all of us have to ask is, how much worse do any of these characteristics have to get before they derail U.S. growth? And to answer that question, you have to look at the two main drivers of economic growth today to see if they're strong enough to hold up against stress tomorrow. And those two main drivers are really the same in any economy, anywhere in the world. They vary in importance, but they're really the same. They are growth in the labor force and growth in labor force productivity. So we're going to talk about those two drivers, and then that'll give us a better idea of how well they'll stand up to higher oil prices, rising inflation, and rising rates. So Paul, we can go to the next slide. So let's start with the first driver, growth in the labor force. All you're seeing here is the difference between people who think jobs are easy to come by and those who think they are hard to come by. And it goes back to 1985. So that you can see that right now we have the highest level of confidence in the US job market that we've had since the booming 1990s. We also know that about 3% of private sector employees are willing to quit their jobs because they believe that better jobs are out there for them. So growth in the labor force powers about 70% of the US economy because consumption is about 70% of the US economy. Growth in the labor force leads to more wages, to more spending. So right now, US consumers have a lot of money to spend, and there are three factors that are contributing to that. First, we have more people working. Some of you a couple weeks ago, you saw the jobs report, 678,000 new jobs in February, coming off of 467,000 new jobs in January. We have the unemployment rate down to 3.8%. We have labor participation ticking up to 62.3%. That is a post-pandemic high. So more people are working. The second factor is that the people who are working are also earning more. 2020 was the first recession in history where personal income actually went up. And you know a lot of that was due to fiscal stimulus, some to the monetary easing. But if you look at average hourly earnings now, they're growing at over 5% year over year. We didn't have that in the last expansion. In the last expansion, average hourly earnings were averaging more around 3%. So not only are more people working, they're also earning more. The third factor I want to mention is that U.S. households are also flush with savings and investment. U.S. household net worth today is $145 trillion. $145 trillion. So yes, consumers are concerned about rising inflation, but not enough yet to really curtail their spending and pull it back. That may change. We'll talk about the things we're going to keep an eye on. But right now, there is a lot of consumer confidence, and consumers have the money to spend. Demand has come back as economy is going to reopen. And so we think that this particular driver of U.S. economic growth is in a very healthy place. So let's talk about the second driver. Paul, you can go to the next slide. The second driver is growth in labor productivity. So growth in labor productivity is all about business investment or CapEx, literally building factories, building bridges, building robots. So putting capital in the hands of workers. And all you're looking at here is the level of U.S. capital investment going back to 2006. So you can see there's this really big surge recently. Business investment is about 20% of U.S. GDP. Now, it's a lot more important in some other economies like China, emerging markets, but in the U.S. it's about 20%. Because it's only about 20%, you don't actually have to have it to see economic growth. And we didn't really have a lot of it in the last expansion. In the last expansion, the only two sectors that were really heavily growing CapEx was technology and energy. And then if you remember what started in 2011 was we started to see commodity price declines, right? Oil prices started falling, other commodity prices started falling. So energy companies pulled in some of their CapEx. Other manufacturers didn't have huge input cost increases. Average hourly earnings, as I said, were manageable. They were 3%. Other input prices were going down. So there wasn't a huge drive to grow capital expenditure. Totally different situation today. Supply cannot meet demand. In the last expansion, supply could meet demand. So you have companies globally ramping up capital expenditure to fix their supply chain. You also have oil prices now above the U.S. cost of production. So U.S. energy companies are seeing a reward for capital investment, and they're out there trying to produce more. Globally, corporations have $6.5 trillion in excess cash able to invest in their supply chains. So we think that business investment, capital expenditure leading to growth in labor force productivity is in a very strong situation today. In fact, probably in a better driver of growth than it was in our last expansion. B of A Global Research predicts real economic growth in the U.S. today. Real economic growth in 2022 will be 3.3%. 3.3%. That is an incredibly strong rate of real economic growth. So we are not predicting a recession in 2022. We are not predicting a recession. However, we are predicting that inflation will continue. So let's talk a little bit more about inflation. You can go to the next slide, Paul. So inflation is pretty simple, right? Supply can't meet demand. Some of you saw the inflation print a couple weeks ago. CPI is running 7.9% year over year. That is a 40-year high. And I know the news recently has focused on the spike in oil prices and what you're experiencing at the gas pump, but remember that even prior to Russia's invasion of the Ukraine, we had very broad-based inflation, not just in goods, but also in services. So in services, think healthcare, think restaurant meals, think haircuts. And you can't blame that on rising oil prices, right? The Wall Street Journal had a great line, your haircut didn't get stuck on a slow boat from China. So we had very broad-based inflation even prior to Russia's invasion of the Ukraine. And if you remember that graphic I showed you earlier, the roller coaster graphic with that kind of red pool of ink that was phase one liquidity, that liquidity is what we have to work off in order to bring inflation under control. So from 1960 up to the pandemic, money supply growth was about 7% on average annually. After the pandemic, it shot up to 30%. Now it's come down more recently, but it's also still running at a double-digit pace. We need to bring down money supply growth to more like the historical average before we're going to get inflation under control. Now, we think the Fed will be raising rates and will accomplish that, but you have to think of inflation as like this big super tanker. It is very slow and cumbersome to turn, so it'll take a while. So if you remember, I said there's going to be 4 shifts. This is shift number 1. We are entering an era of higher than average historical inflation. For this year, we think inflation may actually even go higher in some of the monthly prints we're going to see. It'll peak and then it'll come down, but we think for the year it's probably going to run around 7%. 7%. Longer term, and this has implications later for the markets, we think inflation is also going to run higher than its historical average. Certainly higher than the Fed's target of 2%. So over the next 20 years, we think inflation is going to average 2.8%. So that is shift number 1, shifting out of a period of low inflation into a period of higher inflation over the next 2 decades, certainly higher than the Fed target. The Fed is going to be acting to bring inflation down. So let's go to the next slide. We'll talk about the Fed. So as I said, things are moving so fast that this slide is already outdated. It's basically showing you the very rapid increase in the Fed's balance sheet, right? As the pandemic hit, it was purchasing bonds, it was getting money supply out there in the economy. At the end of 2021, the Fed said, we're going to taper those purchases of bonds. We'll be done by March. So people said, okay, so you'll be done by March. You'll probably have the first rate increase in March and then 3 rate hikes in 2022. Then you got another inflation print that was even higher, and people said maybe 4 rate hikes in 2022. Bank of America Global Research said at the end of last year, we think there's going to be 7 rate hikes in 2022. And everyone thought we were crazy. Well, if you looked at the last Fed statement, they're at 7 rate hikes in 2022. Now, don't get too hung up on the number of rate hikes. Don't get too hung up on whether it's a quarter point or a half point. What really matters is that every Fed meeting is in play. The Fed is going to be looking at data, and if they need to raise rates, they're going to raise rates. We think that at the end of this year, we'll have a Fed funds rate of 1.875%, 1 7/8, and that you'll see the 10-year Treasury at 2.25%. This is not rocket science. It's not false precision. It's a reasonable assumption because if you look at past rate hike cycles, the Fed funds rate typically ends where the U.S. Treasury, where the 10-year U.S. Treasury began, and then the 10-year Treasury, U.S. Treasury ends about half point higher than that. So 1.875% Fed funds end of year, 2.25% 10-year U.S. Treasury. But, and I hope this is reassuring for those of you who lived through the 70s, that is nowhere near the 20% interest rates we saw in the early 80s. We are not talking hyperinflation and rapidly drastic escalating rate hikes. We think the Fed will do this in a measured and balanced way. We've learned our lesson from the 70s and 80s. And so we think rates will go higher, but not drastically higher. So this is the second shift besides the inflation transition that we're going through. We are entering a new rate hike cycle. Okay, Paul, you can go to the next slide. So just to review very quickly, base case, you've got growth in the labor force, growth in labor productivity, 2 main drivers of U.S. economic growth. We think they are in very good position for 2022. 2 shifts I was talking about, also a new inflation regime as well as a new rate hike cycle. Number 3 shift that I want to mention is geopolitical risk and a shifting of globalization to regionalization. You will see governments starting to trust their allies for access to natural resources rather than their neighbors who they feel are threatening. You will also see more and more countries start to move their supply chains back onshore in order to regain some independence. So that is shift number 3. Shift number 4 is volatility. So if you think about it, you've got these 3 shifts I mentioned: higher inflation, interest rate hikes, and geopolitical risk. They're all creating uncertainty, and that uncertainty leads to increased volatility. So you will see increased volatility going forward. None of these mean there has to be a U.S. recession. None of them indicate that we will absolutely have a U.S. recession. Now, we will have a U.S. recession eventually, right? It's a business cycle. But right now, we don't have the indicators that we're headed for a recession this year. What will change our mind? There's 2 indicators I want to mention. The first is a sustained increase in the price of oil into the $110, $140 range. And by sustained, I mean 6 to 12 months. We're not there, right? We've seen oil all over the place. It even went below 100 recently. We're not there yet, but that's something to keep an eye on. The other thing is you want to look at leading indicators, and one of the important ones is U.S. consumer sentiment. If we see, again, a sustained, very deep drawdown in consumer sentiment, that would indicate that consumers are going to pull back. And like I said, consumption drives 70% of our economy, and that would be a leading indicator. Don't get too stressed out by lagging indicators reported in the media. So the classic one is retail sales. Retail sales come out monthly. They're all over the place. They're reported in nominal dollars, very hard to interpret. Focus on leading indicators. Okay, so consumer sentiment would be one of those. There's also the leading economic indicator index, which is also something you can keep an eye on. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So I'm going to transition from the economy and what our forecast means for the economy to what we think that means for the markets. And this is one of the reasons I asked all of you where you were invested at the top of here, at the top of this speech. So real quick, let's go back to our base case. 3.3% real U.S. economic growth and forecast for inflation this year about 7%. You just add those 2 numbers together and you get about 10% plus nominal GDP growth in the U.S. in 2022. That is incredibly strong nominal GDP growth, stronger than we've had in decades. The first takeaway for the markets and for investing is this. Anytime you see economic growth, you're going to prefer risk assets over bonds. So risk assets are things like stocks, real estate, and commodities over bonds. Paul, you can go to the next slide. While we prefer stocks over bonds, we do not think that this is going to be like 2021 with that liquidity boat basically riding the tide and lifting all stocks higher. The return on the S&P 500 in 2021 was 28%. That is much higher than historical average. We think this year you'll be lucky to get single-digit positive returns. So our forecast for the S&P 500 at the end of this year is 4,600. It's been floating around 4,400 recently. Maybe you get 3 or 4% positive gain, and then you add 1 or 2% dividend yield on that. You're at mid-single-digit returns on the S&P 500. But there will be a lot of volatility in the meantime, right? I talked about the fourth shift, and there will be winners and losers. So when we look at who is going to be a winner in this type of scenario, we're looking at, for instance, companies that have pricing power in an inflationary environment, those that can pass on rising prices to their clients or consumers. So we like a lot of cyclical companies in the industrials, in the material sector, metals and mining, for instance, companies that have high operating leverage. I hope this is also music to your ears. We also think the biggest upside will be in the travel, hospitality, and leisure industries because of the reopening of the U.S. economy. So that is also an area we favor in the public equity market. We can go to the next slide. So our Chief Investment Officer, Chris Heisey at Bank of America Private Bank, he's expecting what he calls a buffalo or moose market rather than a bull market. I cannot tell you that Chris really knows what a buffalo or moose does versus a bull, but you get the idea, right? It's not charging higher. It's not energetic. I think he's thinking of that song where the buffalo roam, so he's thinking of like kind of a roaming, sideways trading market, but in any case, you get the idea. I've already told you that in this type of market, there will be winners and losers. You'd like to do better than the roaming buffalo, right? So we're favoring the industrials, we're favoring cyclicals. For obvious reasons, we like energy companies, we like aerospace, we like defense. On the growth side, I want to mention growth because if some of you have seen the kind of very big name, famous technology growth names got slaughtered in the market at the beginning of this year. We do like growth names for our clients. But I cannot emphasize enough that we want profitable names that have high cash flow, proven business models. So think of things like hardware, like semiconductors. There are more speculative technology names out there that were high flyers in the past that have really cratered recently. A lot of these have earnings that are far out into the future. And if you've heard this expression, long duration growth stocks, that refers to the fact that they're interest rate sensitive. And the reason they're interest rate sensitive is that their earnings are so far out in the future and their cash flows are getting, you still hear me? Their cash flows are getting discounted at a higher interest rate. And we don't think the upside is there right now. So if you have very patient capital and you're invested in those and you want to hold on for a long time, it may come back. But that's not an area where we're putting the next dollar in new client capital. Okay, we can go to the next slide. Okay, bonds. And this is the reason why I asked some of you, how many of you were invested in bonds? Investors in bonds have really tough decisions to make right now. So on the one hand, bonds have a place in everybody's portfolio for risk mitigation. And occasionally you'll see them rally, right, during particularly risky times. You'll see a flight to safety and you'll see US Treasuries rally briefly. But on the other hand, bond math is bond math. When interest rates go up, bond prices go down. We expect the Fed to raise rates 7 times this year. We do not expect a positive return in investment grade bonds this year. It's probably going to be down 2%. That's not accounting the impact of inflation, right, which just eats away at capital. Longer term, here's the problem. You heard me talk about a shift into a longer-term period of higher than average inflation, probably around 2.8%. Our forecast for the return on bonds, longer term, 20 years, is 3.3%. So that gives you about a half point in real return on bonds every year. And the question all of us need to ask and sit down with our financial advisor and go through is that enough? If I'm saving for retirement and I want to grow my capital, is a half point real return enough? Now, if you have a lot of money, maybe it is, because maybe you just want to come out ahead of inflation. But if you're really trying to grow capital in anticipation of retirement, you need to look more closely at your bond allocation and think how far that's going to get you. Again, they have a place in every portfolio. I'm not saying dump your bonds. I'm just saying look very carefully at the allocation that you have. Okay, we can go to the next slide. I'm going to mention alternatives as the last asset class, and it's taken on increasing importance for our clients, just given everything I told you about our outlook right now. Now, private placements are not for everybody, but they do serve a very specific role in our portfolios. Hedge funds, for instance, can hedge equity volatility. We talked about the major shift to volatility. They can pay out higher income than traditional bonds. And they can also hedge interest rate risk because, as I mentioned, we're entering a period of rising rates, but hedge funds quite often owe floating rate notes that don't have the same interest rate sensitivity as traditional bonds do. When you want to talk about inflation risk, real estate is an inflation hedge. Now, if you own a portfolio of buildings, you're good. But a lot of our clients want to invest in private placements that pool commercial real estate, so they have an inflation hedge. And finally, private equity has beaten every single asset class hands down over the last couple decades. We think it will continue to do so. So private equity is really about building your capital over the long term. And there's one reason I'll just emphasize here. If you think about what I said about productivity and innovation and business investment, so much of the innovation in the US economy is driven by emerging companies, startups. Those startups today are staying private longer. They're not launching right into the public equity market. You want to be invested in those companies at the fastest point of growth for them, and that's frequently when they're private. So that's why we often feel like private equity is a better source of capital accumulation over the long term. But it takes patient investors. Just want to mention that. Okay, we can go to the last slide. You know what, I'm going to skip this for time. There are some themes going forward. Again, these are more 10-year plays that I think our clients can carve out spaces for in their portfolios if they want and they're interested. Things like climate change, et cetera. Paul, we can go to the next slide. So I'm going to leave you just with a couple reminders and then a summation of where we are in terms of our portfolio positioning. A couple of reminders. When I meet with business professionals, business owners, I find that you are often very, very disciplined with your capital allocation for your business. But you don't take the same rigor when you look at your personal balance sheet. And I just want to encourage you all, particularly given the shifts I just mentioned, take a really, really thorough look at your personal balance sheet and ask yourself a couple questions. So first of all, don't hold on to too much cash. It's just losing ground in an inflationary environment. You need what you need for emergency purposes, but don't hold on to too much. Don't convince yourself that bonds are safe. There are a lot of risks associated with bonds, and it's okay to hold them, but you want to make sure that you're getting compensated for those risks. And that's really the larger question about anything in your portfolio, any allocation you have on your personal balance sheet. Just make sure you understand what risk you are taking and that you're going to be compensated for that risk, because that is the same rationale that you use when you invest your business capital. Okay, last slide. So just a summary, and you probably can't read it, but it's essentially a green, yellow, red slide showing you those risks in 2022 where we think we will be compensated and those where we think we won't be compensated. So I already mentioned we like stocks over bonds. We prefer US stocks over developed countries outside of the US and emerging market equities. We like industrials, materials, financials, energy, aerospace and defense, leisure, hospitality, and travel. And finally, we want to use private placements to hedge the risks that are out there created by these 4 shifts that I mentioned, as well as to provide a boost to capital accumulation over the long term. So I know I threw a lot at you. I'm pretty sure I've used up all my time. Happy to answer questions later in the program. Thank you.
Okay, so my takeaway was that my haircut is not going to be on a slow boat to China, because these curls don't cut themselves. Thank you, Bay. Really, really amazing. Remember to use the cards. We will have a little bit of time after Dr. Kleinhens speaks to take your questions. But if you could on those cards, maybe just put one for, if you have it for Bay, put Bay, and if you have it for Dr. Kleinhens, put Dr. K, okay? That would be amazing. So Dr. Robert Kleinhens is principal economist and founder of the firm Kleinhens Economics. A leading voice on the economy, Dr. Kleinhens has over 30 years of experience and expertise. In addition to his duties with Kleinhens Economics, Robert is on the faculty at Cal State Long Beach and associate director of the university's Office of Economic Research, and an executive in residence at Cal Poly Pomona's College of Business Administration. Dr. Kleinhens is happy to be back playing beach volleyball and hosting game nights with his family, a new pandemic-induced tradition. So please welcome Dr. Robert Kleinhens.
Good morning. How are you? Okay. So you heard a little bit about me. I asked Laura to please keep it short, so thank you, Laura. And thanks to the San Gabriel Valley Economic Partnership for inviting me to not only work on the forecast report that's on your table, but also to give the San Gabriel Valley forecast presentation. Thanks to Cal Poly Pomona and the College of Business Administration, Eric, and at Cal Poly Pomona and all of the CPP, and then the San Gabriel Valley Partnership. I also want to thank Megan and Naya and Kimberly Ritter, who are the economists who also helped me to produce this report. So, we've heard about a lot of people who have all these connections to the San Gabriel Valley, and even though I live in Long Beach, it's not exactly the San Gabriel Valley, but here are my connections. So I think this might be the 7th or 8th time over the past 15 or 20 years that I've presented to the San Gabriel Valley Economic Partnership. So that I'm hoping that I get a check mark for that. Okay, so I have 3 sons. The oldest did his Eagle Project in 2013. Do you know the Cobb Estate? Where you have the trail that goes up? My son installed the pedestrian archway as a part of his Eagle Project. Do any of you know about that? I bet you if you've taken that hike that goes up the Cobb Estate, so even though we lived down in Long Beach, we had strong ties with the National Forest Service and had the good fortune. I'm going to go see this after I get done today because I haven't seen it in a few years. But that and a number of other Eagle projects were done right in that vicinity. And so that's my other sort of San Gabriel Valley connection. Will that work? Is that going to work? Okay, good, thank you. Bay, thanks for doing the financial outlook because, as an economist, people always ask me where they should be putting their money. And I'm not a Wall Street economist. I'm what I call the Main Street economist. My background is not in financial economics, but in urban and regional economics. I study the economics of industries, what makes cities tick, what makes regions tick, economic development and workforce development. And so asking me stock tips is sort of like asking an orthopedic surgeon to work on your brain. You just really, I know that there's a brain. I know there's a financial market. I could give you some idea about stocks, but my best advice is to go over to table, I don't know, 6 or 7 over there and talk with Bay. Okay? So why a San Gabriel Valley forecast? By the way, am I driving or? Okay, thanks. Why a San Gabriel Valley forecast? Or maybe I'm not driving. This isn't working. So, with 1.5 million people and a workforce of about 700,000, anywhere else outside of LA County or in many states, this would be a major metropolitan area by itself. And of course, that's true for so many parts of LA County, which is huge in its own right. So it makes a lot of sense for us to understand what's happening locally. This is a very important part of the LA County and Greater Southern California region. I've been tracking it for many years. Southern California is kind of like my sandbox when it comes to doing economic research. I've been doing a lot of research here dating back over the decades, I'll just say that. And that includes looking at the San Gabriel Valley region. So we will take a look as we move through and talk about the San Gabriel Valley outlook. We'll look first at California and its regions. That's an important backdrop to understanding what's happening locally. Then we'll take a look at Southern California and LA County. Then we turn to the San Gabriel Valley. 2 special topics. One, everybody wants to know how much their house is worth, so we'll talk a little bit about housing. And one that is out there, but we kind of need to place more time and attention on it, and that's demographics and what it means for the future of our economy, both here in the San Gabriel Valley and the state of California. So, it worked? Okay, thanks. So let's talk about California. There were a lot of concerns about California recovering from the pandemic because of the fact that we had much more stringent health protocols compared to other states around the country. And indeed, it took us a little while to get going, but jobs recovery is clearly underway at this point. I think I'm yeah, there we go. So this clicker is from the Midwest. It's a little slow. I'm from Cleveland. My wife gets, when I'm up on stage, I can talk relatively quickly, but most of the time when I'm in conversation with my wife, she says, "So what were you saying?" Okay, so we're going to start off with the unemployment rate, then we'll move forward. Back 2 years ago in the early part of 2020, the unemployment rates, you heard about the U.S., the unemployment rates here in Southern California and the state shot up. They multiplied, they were up by a factor of 4. The unemployment rate in California went from about 4% to 16%. We have come a long way since then, over the past 2 years, and you can see that progress that is being made here. This is the unemployment rate in blue for the state of California, which is currently just under 6%. We'll get a new reading this coming Friday, and then, of course, you already heard about the U.S. unemployment rate. We're tracking fairly closely with the U.S. as a whole. Same way with our job growth. These are wage and salary jobs that you're looking at, and it did take us a little while to get started here in the state of California, but especially over the last several months, say the second half of 2021, we've been adding jobs at a rate of better than 7% year over year. The state normally adds jobs at a rate of about maybe 1% or something like that year over year. So a lot of times I'll take our pandemic recovery and compare it to what happened during the Great Recession, because we've had a lot of recessions over the decades, but these two really stand out. These two downturns really stand out for their severity. And the recovery that we're experiencing right now, despite what you might be hearing about in the news, despite all those stories about how disappointing this recovery is, this is a lights-out recovery compared to what we saw coming out of the Great Recession. It's a very different recovery. Every one of these economic cycles is different, but what you can see here is that right now in red, that as of January, we're just 3% shy of the jobs that were lost during the pandemic shutdown in the first part of 2022. It took 4 years for us to get all the jobs back after the Great Recession. We should be getting all of our jobs back by the time we close out 2020 for here in California, which is good news. So, I don't know what I'm doing. Go ahead, Paul. Point over here. Okay. Thanks. Can you just advance the slide? Oh. We're way ahead. Paul's playing games with me. Okay. I can do this without the slides, but it's much more fun with the slides for you, not for me. Anyway, so we're going back a couple. The year-over-year changes that we've seen over the last several months for the state of California have far outdistanced the job gains that the U.S. as a whole has seen. You're not seeing it here, but so now we're talking about the unemployment rate. So let's talk about the unemployment rate. This is going to extend my time. Okay, so very quickly, what you can see here is that these are year-over-year job growth rates in blue for the state of California. Concerns about California's recovery certainly are well-founded because we did follow a different set of health protocols. We reopened more slowly. The leading industries the industries that were the most affected by the downturn, things like leisure and hospitality, so we're talking about restaurants, hotels, entertainment venues, figure somewhat large, more importantly in California's economy. And so as they tipped, so too did the state. But on the other hand, we had other sectors that were quite successful during the downturn. The tech sector, of course, was quite strong. Logistics was also very strong. So you have these counterbalances. All in all, though, the economy is advancing at a good pace, and by the end of this year, I think we'll recover all the jobs that were lost during the Great Recession. Darn. So I'll just stick with this. So the unemployment rate is still high by national standards. We have one of the highest unemployment rates. I think only New Mexico has a higher unemployment rate at this point in time. You must know that the unemployment rate in the state of California is consistently higher than that of the U.S. So that's an historical artifact we're not going to get around. As we get into an economic cycle and we get close to the peak of expansion, that's when the state unemployment rates typically match those of the nation. So nope. Can you go back? So I'm just going to ask you to run the slides. Is that okay? All right. So, and then I have them here. Sorry about all this. It should be much more smoother, much more smooth. So let's see. I already talked about how the employment gains in the state of California have been strong. We have among the strongest in the nation, 7.4% in the month of January. You can see some of the other states that are often mentioned in the same breath with California. Texas at 5.5%, Florida. These are some of the other big states that are also growing at 5.5%. Arizona next door growing at 4.5%. Please, next slide. And the unemployment rates have improved markedly across the state. So green is better. And so the unemployment rate, for example, for LA County back in January of last year was 11%, and then now it's at 6%. So that gives you a sense of the improvement that occurred over the course of the past year. And the interesting thing about this economic cycle, it's not an economic cycle, it was an economic event, and we're in recovery, is that the recovery began and was more sustained in the inland parts of California. Typically what happens in an economic cycle is that the inland parts of California are hit early on. They go south earlier than the coastal parts of California, and they're the last to recover. But as you can see at the top of the list here, Up the Stockton Lodi and the Inland Empire MSAs have already recovered all the jobs they had lost and are well on their way. And in fact, these are also areas where the labor force is growing. That's not the case here in Los Angeles County. I mean, we still have a ways to go before we get back to where our labor force was before the pandemic. You can see down on the list that we're about 4% away from recovering all the jobs due to that pandemic shutdown. Turn, please. And we've heard, at least early in this economic downturn, we heard this idea of a K-shaped recovery. You know, in every economic cycle, there are winners and there are losers. It became much more pronounced this time around compared to past economic cycles. You know, in the Great Recession, it was oftentimes called a man-cession because of the fact that construction took a huge hit and manufacturing took a huge hit. Here we had a large number of services like restaurants and hotels and things like that were very hard hit. What's happened is that higher wage earners have pretty much recovered their jobs. This only goes through August, so it's not exactly the most current, but for the state of California, for people who earn a wage above the median, they have largely seen their employment restored, but for those who are below the median, about 24%. And this is back to August, so we've had a lot of improvement since then. This data just has not been updated. But we still have a long road for recovery for many of these people in these industries that are low-wage industries. So we can go to the next slide, please. So I already talked about the labor market. Let's talk a little bit about gross state or gross domestic product. And once again, it's important to note that California has not been a laggard. It actually has outpaced the U.S. in terms of growth in economic activity over the last several quarters. So the idea that we are behind the curve is not well founded when you take a look at the data. We are growing. We are growing at a fast pace. We have some very strong sectors that are carrying us along, and there are other sectors that are very important to our economy that are coming back at this time, one of which you're going to hear about today when we talk about hospitality. It's one of the key sectors of the state economy. So next slide, please. And just to illustrate where the state of California stands relative to other states, dark blue represents the fastest pace of growth in gross domestic or gross state product at the state level. It's at 7% for the state of California. There's some comparison states there as well. So these are good pieces of information for us to know, because as we shape our thoughts about where we're going to be going in 2022 and 2023, you hear stories about, people leaving California. It's a trickle. You hear, Elon Musk moved to Texas, got a lot of headlines and so on. And these are not things that we should ignore. I'm just saying we need to put them into perspective. It's not like the economy is heading south as a result of these things. These are relatively, these are just a handful of very visible events that we need to, of course, pay attention to. But the state economy is in relatively good shape. Next slide, please. So that's the story on California. Let's talk about Southern California and Los Angeles County. San Gabriel Valley is, of course, so centrally located. It's hard to talk about the San Gabriel Valley and only talk about LA County. We have to touch on the Inland Empire a bit. I know when I talk with individuals at Cal Poly Pomona, the issue is, where do you draw the dividing line between the Inland Empire and the San Gabriel Valley and so on, and it just blends from one to another. It's important for us to recognize that we have this huge integrated economic region, and while it's important to understand what's happening in our local, that is to say the San Gabriel Valley economy, we also need to understand what's happening in adjacent regions. So we'll go forward and we'll take a quick look at unemployment rates. Here are the unemployment rates for Los Angeles County, typically much higher than Orange County, which is in orange. So Orange County's unemployment is already just around 4%. It's doing relatively well. The Inland Empire has an unemployment rate that came down nicely over the course of this economic recovery. Again, to say what I was saying earlier, the Inland Empire often is one of the last regions to come back. So the fact that it's come on strongly is good. Of course, the strength there has been its logistics sector, which has really been quite important to economic growth. But it's also one of the few areas that has really seen, well, for one thing, it's seen its labor force already come back to pre-pandemic levels and continue to grow. So there's a lot of potential in the Inland Empire because of the labor force out there. Here in Los Angeles County, the labor force is still several tens of thousands below the pre-pandemic level. So we've got some room for improvement here. And then Orange County, the interesting thing about Orange County is that it's a magnet for jobs, but a lot of those jobs are imports, or I should say, are jobs that are held by people who either live in adjacent counties or other parts of Southern California. Next slide, please. And you can see, I don't know if you looked, but the unemployment rates, like the LA County unemployment rate was 19%. Unprecedented. That's the highest unemployment rate in data that goes back to 1976. So we went through a very traumatic period, and as this shows, we lost several 100,000 jobs from peak to trough, 4.6 million jobs just before the pandemic. It fell to 3.8 million jobs. 3.8 million jobs rolls us all the way back to 1996 for Los Angeles County. We had that job count back in the 1990s. So we haven't really added a lot of jobs in LA County over the last 30 years. We peaked out, as you can see here, at 4.6 million. Right now, we're at 4.4 million. We should be able to close this jobs gap by the end of this year if all goes well. So that's good news. That would put us about a year ahead of the recovery that we saw during the Great Recession. Next slide, please. And so while it's important to acknowledge that just about every part of the LA County economy has seen job gains, and this is from January. These numbers just came out about a week and a half ago. And we're looking at an 8% plus job gain for jobs overall in Los Angeles County. The sectors that were the hardest hit are coming back most strongly. Leisure and hospitality added jobs. That's a 47% year-over-year increase. So keep in mind that this sector lost about half of its jobs during the shutdown. Information, which includes the motion picture and sound recording industry, lost more than 50% of its jobs. And so that's come back strongly as well. Information, as you can see there, is third from the top. Those three sectors that are at the top were three of the hardest hit sectors, both in terms of severity, that's the percentage decline, and the numbers of jobs lost. So to see those coming back in a strong way is most important. And then you look down the list and you can see some of the other sectors of the economy. It's reassuring to know that by and large, now these are year-over-year changes, so monthly we see a little bit different picture, and especially in the early months of the year we see retail trade and things like that show month-to-month job losses because of the seasonality. I'm emphasizing the year-over-year changes in my presentation because it's a little hard to talk through all the seasonal effects that are affecting these industries. Move forward. And so one other thing to note as we move on is that professional, scientific, and technical services, which include things like architecture, engineering, legal services, accounting, all of that, that's a sector that's quite strong in the Los Angeles area economy as well. So again, the integrated aspect of our regional economy is something that we oftentimes forget, and especially as we are here with the economic partnership and we talk about what it takes to make this region grow in the future and create the jobs that are going to be there in, say, 10 years from now, 2032, and to have a workforce that's going to be prepared for that, we need to think regionally. We need to think about the entire Southern California region. So LA County may be home to the largest number of jobs by far compared to these other areas. And its diversity is unbelievable. You know, this is the 20th or 21st largest economy on the planet. But much of the job growth has been occurring over the last 30 years in Orange County and in the Inland Empire. When we look ahead over the next 10 years, I guess if I'm here in the San Gabriel Valley, I don't even know what direction I'm facing, but wherever east is, I'd be looking east. Which way is east? Yeah, okay. Because that's where the population growth is going to happen and where so much economic growth is going to occur. So as you're thinking strategically about the next several years, that's something to look at. Now let's talk about the San Gabriel Valley, and we'll go on to the next slide, please. Again, you know, one of the reasons we economists spend so much time talking about jobs and the unemployment rate is not because we get all excited about jobs and the unemployment rate. It's because it's one of the most fundamental indicators of the economy that we have, and it's reported on with a somewhat consistent regularity. So over the course of the past year, we've seen huge improvement in the unemployment rate for the San Gabriel Valley region, which is what you see here in blue. And you see the comparison against the unemployment rate annually for Los Angeles County. So about a 9% unemployment rate last year for all of last year. But if we go to the next slide, you'll see that the unemployment rate fell month by month as we moved through 2021. And it dropped below 6% at the tail end of last year. If we go to the next slide, you'll see that if you took a moment and you added up all these numbers and you divide by 31 or whatever, then you're going to get an average unemployment rate of about 5.1%. Look at all these people who are studying the unemployment rates for the city. So for the city in which you live, you can find the unemployment rate if you're here in in the San Gabriel Valley. LA County's there for reference, and as I said a moment ago, the San Gabriel Valley unemployment rate, if you averaged all these out, it would be about a little over 5%, which is really good news as we start 2022. Go ahead, Paul, please. So to get jobs data for this southern San Gabriel Valley region, that's not readily available. These are wage and salary job numbers that you're seeing, and wait a minute, am I looking at a set of bars that ends in June 2021? Yes, you are looking at a set of bars that showed San Gabriel Valley employment by month that end in June 2021. The data on sub-county regions comes out very slowly with about a 2-quarter lag compared to what we get for the counties and for the state. So yes, in June of 2021, we had 654,000 jobs. From 2019 to 2020, we lost about 60,000 jobs. 60,000 jobs in the San Gabriel Valley region. Okay, the average fell to 640,000 in 2020. So we're climbing back from that low at the present time. The San Gabriel Valley job count generally follow the LA County trend fairly closely. So you're looking at the LA County trajectory with that black line, and it's going to take some time in 2023 before we fully recover all the jobs here in the San Gabriel Valley region. Maybe, if we're lucky, the tail end of 2022. But that seems to be where we stand in terms of full job recovery. Next slide, please. So this is one of those slides that only an economist could love, so I'll walk you through it. You've got non-farm jobs. That's what we were just looking at a moment ago. And the second quarter of last year, we had 651,000 non-farm jobs there at the top of the screen in the middle. And I'm comparing that against the second quarter of a year earlier. An 8.1% year-over-year increase, so that's very impressive. So that means that we're definitely on the right track. By comparison, over that same time period, LA County added jobs at a rate of 6.8%, top right. Okay, the largest job gains, we've already talked about this in the context of the state and LA County, were in those hardest hit industries. Leisure and hospitality added 15,000 jobs out of the 48,000 jobs added over that time period. So you can work your way down that column, the third from the right, and see where the biggest job gains were. Healthcare, huge industry here in the region. Took a hit early on, very likely has surpassed its job count relative to where it was just prior to the pandemic when we get the numbers for 2021 as we get a little further into the year. So that's very important. Solid growth in professional and business services. And then you've got retail, trade, and leisure and hospitality. Those two sectors are very much integrated with each other, and we'll be hearing about the hospitality and tourism sector of the San Gabriel Valley very shortly. These are the two sectors that really are driven by growth in that visitor base that we expect to come back here in 2022 and continue to grow as we go through the next several years. Logistics is also important, as is manufacturing in this region. It's a hugely diverse region. So both of those are on the road to recovery as well. Thank you. And so annual wages, average wages for the San Gabriel Valley in the middle there, an average wage of $60,000 across all industries. By comparison, LA counties is about $71,000. So the mix of industries kind of dictates the average wage. And at the very high end, you've got information. Information includes a pretty wide array of things, which include IT. It also includes newspapers, so the San Gabriel Valley Tribune, and any number of other things. But that average wage is, more than double the average the wage for the region as a whole. Down at the very bottom, you've got leisure and hospitality and retail trade. These are average wages for the year, not necessarily full-time. So if you've got industries where the workforce is oftentimes working less than full-time, then you're going to have lower average wage numbers. And then the average wage, of course, for those sectors is also somewhat lower. So we'll go forward, please. You can see that I'm running out of time. This is a conference about economic development and workforce development in part. We're talking about the future of the region. Where are the region's strengths? That's one way to look at that, is to see how the San Gabriel Valley stacks up against LA County. And what you see here is that where the blue bars are taller than the red, I'm colorblind today, black dots, that means you've got a somewhat larger share of industry employment in the San Gabriel Valley compared to LA County. So healthcare is very important to the region. As you look from left to right, you also see wholesale trade. So logistics in general includes both the transportation and warehousing and the wholesale trade component, and you can see that it has a relative advantage with respect to wholesale trade, and it's neck and neck with some of these other sectors of the LA County economy. When we look at where there are opportunities to grow the regional economy over the next several years, health is certainly one, but you really want to look at the industries that are so-called traded industries, industries where you're selling stuff to people and businesses outside the region. And those include oftentimes so many different kinds of professional and business services. They also include manufacturing, wholesale trade. Those are some of the industries that increase the size of the economic pie. And then with that larger economic pie, there's more to recirculate in the population-serving industries like retail trade and restaurants and entertainment venues and the like. So when we tackle economic development, we kind of have to have this two-pronged approach where we identify the traded sector jobs, or industries, I should say, traded sector industries that are the source of growth that enable the other industries to thrive as well. Next slide, please. So our outlook for the San Gabriel Valley is that by 2023, we'll catch up and surpass the job counts. That's the middle column here in this table. We'll catch up and surpass the job counts that peaked out back in 2019, our last peak. Solid growth is expected for this year, job growth of about 5.4%, and next year about 2.5%. The population is growing at, this is a very mature region here in Southern California, so we do not expect a lot of population growth. And so we're getting exactly that. And then the unemployment rate, as you can see, will be coming down. We'll go to the next section. So that's the economic outlook. I know I'm going to be running a little bit low on time, so I'm going to zoom through, no pun intended. And by the way, I'm glad you've got your cameras on today and that you're not wearing your slippers and you decided to wear long pants. This is really good. Okay, real estate. Let's move on to real estate and talk a little bit about home prices and things like that, and then the non-residential market. We can go to the next slide, please. So the median price for the San Gabriel Valley was up 12% in 2021, a $100,000 increase at $915,000. This should be no surprise that we've seen the home price in the median, the median home price for the region continue to rise. That certainly has been the case for, if we go to the next slide, for the state and for the region as a whole. LA County's median price from the California Association of Realtors was $773,000 for the month of February. The month-to-month changes, we're at the point in time during the year, when you go from roughly November to February, where the median price kind of goes sideways or it even edges down a little bit. So let's not be concerned about those monthly changes, but the yearly gains are all double-digit, and we expect, in all likelihood, the first part of this year we'll continue to see double-digit gains. It's not because there's a huge supply. The sales you see are down year over year. We've got a very tightly constrained market, very limited supplies, and so that's driving prices. We also have strong demand from a demographic perspective. Millennials are in their prime home buying years, and it's a huge age cohort. So there's a lot of pressure on the demand side. If we go to the next slide. Well, let's talk about this. Let's see. Affordability with those higher home prices has been falling. And so those numbers that you're looking at, like 21% for Los Angeles County, that's the percentage of households in Los Angeles County that could afford to buy the median priced home, which for the fourth quarter is just under $800,000. That is accompanied by a $3,700 a month monthly payment. Interest rates, the 30-year mortgage rate, and a 20% down payment, all that. So you need to have $148,000 to be able to afford that monthly payment. This is just, to illustrate what's happening at the present time. As interest rates go up, that monthly payment's going to go up. As home prices have gone up, that monthly payment has gone up quite a bit. It's mainly the increase in home prices that has driven the affordability from 23 to 21% in LA County. These numbers can get as low as 11%. So there's actually some runway left for this housing market, at least in terms of price appreciation. But home sales, I think, are going to be down quite a bit this year. If we go to the next slide, please. Which is interesting because this is state home sales, seasonally adjusted. That's that blue set of blue bars. And for the past several years, really, we have not seen home sales budge much from the 30-year average for all home sales. We've added population over the past 30-plus years here in California, about a 43% increase in population. But the number of homes that we built is up by about 28%. But home sales really have not budged much from the long-term average. We would expect, with growing population and so on, that we'd see more housing activity than we have. So you heard about all these great things, that home sales were up strongly, especially in the first part of 2021. You're seeing that. Let's see if this works. You're seeing that in this bump right here. But we've receded to, or returned to, that sort of long-term trend level of home sales in the state that we've seen going back many, many years. And of course, the home price, which reached the 800,000 mark earlier a few months ago, is now a little bit below that. It's probably going to, head north of 800,000 as we go forward this year. So I was beginning to talk about how lean supply is driving home prices up. Normal inventory levels about 4 months. Here we're looking at 2 months, so half the normal. Next slide. We heard about rising interest rates. I just mentioned how that's going to affect affordability, but there's still a lot of distance between where we are right now with mortgage rates that have gone up quite a bit and where they will actually choke off activity. So this year will still be a good year for a good year. Home prices will continue to rise. Home sales are going to suffer because more and more households, would-be buyers, will not be able to qualify to buy homes. Next, please. The rental market has been on fire here in Southern California. Those are average rent hikes or rent increases year over year, 11.5% for LA County, and on a very limited sample for the San Gabriel Valley, up 10.5%. You know, you usually expect maybe a 3 or 4% increase in rents year over year, but a lot of things have been topsy-turvy as a result of the pandemic. This is one of those things. Vacancy rates now back where they typically are in normal times, around 4%, which means a very lean market in terms of the rental market. If we go to the next slide, please. So I was telling you about the supply of homes, the unsold inventory. That's existing homes. New homes are another part of supply. In California, up 15% compared to a year earlier, 115,000. Our needs for housing on an annual basis are more like 200,000 new homes annually. And we've been falling short of that for many, many years, more than a decade. So our housing shortfall is quite large at this time. So those increases in home prices should be no surprise. And that's true for LA County. You see, even though we've had a pretty substantial increase in permits over the past year, and the San Gabriel Valley, each of these are areas where population growth is outstripping, even if it's slow, it's outstripping our housing needs. What happens as a consequence is things like overcrowding and so on that oftentimes fly below the radar. Did you know that somewhere in the neighborhood of 90% of the communities in Southern California prohibit anything more than single-family homes? I mean, if we have to address our housing challenges, we have to do that through a hard look at our zoning and other kinds of regulations that affect our ability to build more housing. And you know, I've already got one son who left the state. I've got 2 other sons who could very well leave the state. If you want your kids to leave the state, then don't build any more housing. If you want your kids to be around to help you through the door when you get older, figure out a way to keep them here. Next slide. To give you an idea of how much of a shortfall we have in terms of new home building, this table, I know it's very busy. It's the largest metropolitan areas around the country in terms of their new home construction through November of last year. And what you see at the top is that the Dallas-Fort Worth area added 72,000 new housing units. We only added 115,000 for the whole state last year. LA County through November for this particular data source added 228,000 up to that point in time. The Inland Empire, which is also here, you know, just over the road a piece, 14,000. So to give you an idea of how we compare with other parts of the country, I just wanted to share this with you. Next slide. I talked about this, you know, we've added population to the tune of 43%. Our housing's only grown by 28%. We'll move forward. On the non-residential side, we have had an extremely tight industrial property market. No surprise with the growth in logistics, distribution, and so on. It's been, of course, you've heard about the ports and how they've had record years in terms of port activity. About 30 to 40% of inbound imports coming into the United States come through our local ports. And that affects all of us in Southern California, for better or for worse, right? Because on the one hand, it's an economic engine, and on the other hand, it creates congestion and so on the roads. But it's been given rise to a very tight industrial market with vacancy rates around 1%. The office market, since, you know, we're only beginning to return to our offices, these vacancy rates have been elevated, but we're beginning to see signs of improvement, which is good news. This sector has to return to health. But a healthy office market is going to look different in 2022, 2023 than it did before. Let's keep in mind that the office market has been evolving. The footprint for the typical office person has been declining over the last couple of decades. You know, we don't need file cabinets to keep paper anymore. We don't need a printer anymore because we've gone digital. We don't need an administrative assistant anymore because we have our phones. Well, maybe some things aren't all right, but but that's what's been happening, and so it's kind of a continuation of the trend, and it just was accelerated by virtue of the pandemic. Okay, so we looked at housing. That's one of our challenges, not building enough housing. Another challenge we need to bear in mind, this is my last major topic, then we'll wrap up, demographics. Next, please. So total population based on Department of Finance is expected to grow here in the state of California over the next decade, decade and a half. That's what you see on the left-hand side. But the composition, especially from a workforce perspective, is something that we really need to pay attention to. You've got this workforce pipeline, and you know, millennials are solidly in that workforce pipeline. Gen Xers are solidly in that workforce pipeline. They're in that point in their career where they're going to be in that pipeline for a while. Boomers are leaving the pipeline in large numbers. And what's coming into the pipeline is Gen Z, which is a smaller age cohort than these other age cohorts. And so what's circled there is over the next few years, what's happening to the 65 to 79 age group. That blue line is increasing, as you can see. So think of that as being the exiting boomers. And the line right below that is the entering Gen Z. And look at that gap. The gap is only going to get worse. That means there are going to be more people leaving than coming into this talent pipeline. And California used to be able to rely on people to come from other parts of the country and other parts of the world to augment our internal growth. That's not happening right now. So what we need to think about right now is a homegrown workforce, one that, you know, taps into all of those areas that perhaps have not received the kind of attention that we've received or given them in the past, because we're looking at a housing shortage over the next several years, not housing, I apologize, a labor shortage over the next several years that will drive unemployment rates down and keep them low, and perhaps give rise to wage increases that certainly would be a cause for concern for if you're in business. So next slide, please. And mind you, that older age cohort, 65 to 79, is going to grow in share from 10% of the population in 2016 to 15% of the population in a little less than 10 years. So about a 1/3 increase. Now the good thing is that, you know, old people don't commit crimes. So public safety is not going to be burdened, and they spend money. So those are two good things for your community, but the labor force component, the fact that the labor force is going to suffer, is something that we need to be mindful of as employers. So tight labor market. I talked about state-to-state migration not happening. I talked about immigration also not happening. Means that we've got to pay more attention to our homegrown labor force. I also talked, in that last section, about the chronic undersupply of housing. The two together, I think, are going to create a real challenge for California because it's expensive to live here, and especially for lower wage or middle wage jobs, it's hard to imagine justifying being here and maybe not having the chance to become a homeowner. All of these are huge challenges that we as a state have to be mindful of. We can go forward, please. And one more. So recovery is well underway for the state. That's good news. Recovery is well underway for the region. We've got these challenges that I just talked about. There are a lot of other things as you look through that list of bullets. Artificial intelligence and automation are going to disrupt industries that are very important to this geographic region. I'm thinking specifically about transportation, warehousing, logistics. Workforce preparation, therefore, is important not just, you know, for the next few years, but for the next 10 years. And keep in mind that the 10-year-olds of today are going to be in the workforce 10 years from now. And the people who are just born are going to be in the workforce 20 years from now. We need to do some things right and better to meet those needs for those individuals as we go forward. And they're going to be making decisions on our behalf. They're voting as well, and I want them to make smart decisions. Next slide, please. And just to reiterate the importance of identifying those industries that are strong sources of job growth as well as economic growth. Job growth and economic growth don't necessarily go hand in hand. You get a lot of job growth when you open up more restaurants. You get economic growth when you expand manufacturing, professional and business services, and things like that. So keep that in mind as you're considering the next several years, not just 2022 and 2023. I agree with Bay that we're not looking at a recession. Interest rate hikes are not going to cause a recession. Inflation is elevated, but it's not going to cause a recession. So that being the case, we need to start focusing on some of these long-term concerns that we need to address in order to be successful. Next slide, please. Thank you. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Klein-Hens. Fantastic. That was very swift information. Wow. What we're going to do is go to our networking break. It's 10 o'clock. We'll have about 15 minutes. But what I would like is if you have questions that you have jotted down, we have some reps from in the audience that will take them for you, and we should be able to get at least one or two answered. So we'll see you back at 10:15. We'd love to start the panel portion of the program. If you'd like to grab some coffee, exchange business cards, we will start in 1 minute. Thank you all. If you could take your seats, we will begin. If you could take your seats, we'll begin the panel program. We know that breaking up is hard to do, but we're going to start our program. Grab something to drink, and we will get going. Before we introduce our panel, welcome back, everybody. Before we introduce our panel, I want to encourage you to, if you have cards that you've put a question on, if you wouldn't mind holding them up, we will get them from you. Hopefully we'll have time at the end for a couple of Q&A for Bay and Dr. Kleinhens. We have a couple of sponsors and another dignitary in our midst. Welcome back, everybody. I want to recognize our leadership sponsor, the City of Industry. Welcome. Wanted to thank you, and also a silver sponsor, BYD Motors. They have a very cool hat over there that you might want to pick up. Good for running. Very good. And welcome also to Kimberly Cobos Cawthorn, the mayor of Montebello. We just want to give them a round of applause. And before we introduce our panel, I'd like to thank our media sponsors as well, the San Gabriel Valley Newspaper Group, which includes the Pasadena Star News, Whittier Daily News, and the San Gabriel Valley Daily Bulletin, and Business Life Magazine. Thank you again. We're grateful also to the Krevling Lounge and the team here at Pasadena City College for generously hosting us today. And it's really great to be back on campus. When I came here back in the 80s, ooh, did I just say that out loud? It is very, very beautifully developed since then, and it's kind of fun. I come to Band Fest every year through for the Rose Parade. I don't know if you guys come to those events. It's really fun to come here. But please join me in a round of applause really quickly for everybody, our sponsors that were here. Thank you so much, our media sponsors. We have a theme for this year's summit, and it is Open for Business, Hospitality and Tourism in talk to you a little bit about, let me just ask really quickly, Paula, are we going to show that video right now, yeah? We are going to show a video that just kind of depicts all of what's been going on over the last year and a half, and I don't have a clicker, so I'm assuming Paul's going to start that, and I will step aside, and then we'll introduce our panel.
States has won the Women's World Cup, and Brandon Chastain gets the game winner, the Pink Headers.
He's going for the corner. He's got it. Finch, Young scores.
In 1922, a group of Pomona business leaders set out to establish a merchant exposition for the local residents. 100 years later, their Los Angeles County Fair has not only become one of the largest county fairs in the United States, it's where the community converges, entertainment is experienced, and education is shared. While Fairplex is home of the LA County Fair, it's also a bustling year-round complex. From urban agriculture to top entertainment, there's something for everyone. We are the only facility in the region that offers the size, space, facilities, and special support services required for a wide array of business and consumer events, education programs, and entertainment activities. Local, regional, and national conferences that cater to diverse business, social, and community needs can also be found here. And as a community benefit organization, part of our mission is to strengthen our community in times of need. In 2020, our 487-acre campus became the site of a drive-through food bank. We partnered with Los Angeles County to offer COVID-19 testing and vaccinations. Our Fairplex Child Development Center served the children of law enforcement and essential workers at no cost to them. And our Sheraton Fairplex Hotel briefly served as an emergency medical shelter. In 2021, at the request of the federal government, much of our campus served as an emergency intake site for housing unaccompanied children from the U.S. southern border. Team Hope cared for nearly 10,000 individuals and helped reunify over 7,500 children with their families. Today, Fairplex is poised to become an economic engine for the region once again. Pre-pandemic, $58.2 million was injected into the Pomona economy annually, along with $323.6 million into Los Angeles County and $499.6 million into Southern California overall. And this May, as the LA County Fair celebrates its 100th anniversary, we'll be welcoming back our more than 1 million guests to enjoy food, fun, and entertainment as we go back to our roots. Join us as Fairplex continues its century-long community, entertainment, education, and economic partnership.
Yeah.
have a lot of fun things to do around here. And now to focus again on the theme, let me invite to the stage Dr. Leah Dobson. Dr. Dobson is the Dean and James A. Collins College Distinguished Chair of the Collins College of Hospitality Management at California State Polytechnic University, Pomona, Cal Poly Pomona. Previously, she was chair of the Hospitality and Tourism Management Program at the University of North Texas, and she taught at Cal Poly Pomona, the University of Houston, and Texas Tech University. In addition to her academic career, she has held food and beverage management and corporate positions with Sheraton and Harvey Hotels. Her areas of teaching include hospitality, finance, hospitality managerial accounting, and hospitality cost controls. Leah? Welcome. Welcome. Next, we have a special panel of experts who will discuss tourism and hospitality in the San Gabriel Valley in Southern California in detail. So first, I would like to invite Brian Churchill, Senior Vice President of Hotel Sales at Los Angeles Tourism and Convention Board. Brian is also an avid runner, boater, and home improvement guru. Welcome, Brian Churchill. Brian, you are up first.
Okay.
And Brian is going to do a mini presentation and then have a seat right next to Dr. Dobson.
Will do. Thank you. Our rehearsal, that was it. Well, thank you, everybody. Again, my name is Brian Churchill. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. By way of making the connection, because I feel an obligation with PCC or Pasadena or what have you, I did work as a director of sales and marketing at the I almost said Pasadena Convention Center. I gave myself a promotion at the Westin Pasadena, which was at the time Doubletree. My brother-in-law, sister-in-law, and wife all went to PCC, varying degrees of success, but nonetheless, they did come here. So I won't get into the details, but so I do have a connection. Lived and worked in the area for a few years, way back when. I won't give away my age, but it's a phenomenal area and an economic powerhouse, and I just want to thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit of updates with Los Angeles. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Paul, thanks. So basically today, and I'll be brief because I probably have a little bit too much information to do in 10 minutes, but I wanted to just go over recovery by the numbers. LA has got some very encouraging numbers, and I want to share that with the group. Demand drivers, as we say consistently, we have an embarrassment of riches and some incredible demand drivers, and we have evidence of that now. Consumer sentiment, very positive, not only from a pandemic lens, but also just even month over month, some great improvements. Meetings and conventions demand, because that sector is absolutely critical to sort of shrink hotel inventory, if you will, and create compression. And then some of the key challenges, which really align with the economists in the room. And before I go too far, I want to temper expectations. I'm a sales guy, so I forgive my limited vocabulary and unbridled enthusiasm. Next slide. So I'll start. These are rather simple, but I think just good illustrations of what's happening again when you talk about recovery by the numbers. Some real positive numbers here. If you look at 2022, this is total visitation or total visitor demand provided us by Tourism Economics, and many of you probably know that organization, but we also work with CBRE and STR and so forth to gather our data. But if you look at 2022 with 46.3 million visitors, that's only 91% of 2019. And 2019 in the hospitality sector, and maybe others as well, has really become our benchmark and served as a benchmark for growth. So at 91%, better than we expected, but still not complete recovery. You look at 2023 and we're already at 100% of visitation. So it's just around the corner, incredibly encouraging. Our North Star goal in 2018 was to get to 50 million, and so we'll be recovering to that 50 million or slightly above by 2023. Next slide is total overnight visitation. Again, Simple, 87% of 2019 at this point for 2022, 98% in 2023, but 105% for overnight visitation in 2024. And why that's important is that's the almighty room night. And we really gauge economic impact, even our own funding through tours, transit occupancy tax and a tourism marketing district. All that is obviously revenues driven by room nights or accommodations. Next slide is domestic overnight visitation. Again, 24.2 million visitors in 2022, so we're at about 94% of 2019 levels. If you look at 2023, we'll be at 102, so already well above 2019 levels. The next slide, international visitation, this is where we have a little bit of an Achilles heel. There's some vulnerabilities here. 2022, we're only at 60% of 2019 levels, and that's obviously because of flight corridors not reopening and that demand really not even coming back yet. In 2019, we were only at 7.4 million visitors, and in 2024, we'll get to 97% of that. The reason why it's important, though, is even out of 50 million visitors, those 7.4 million only represent about 14% of total visitation, but they spend close to 21%. So they stay longer and spend more. So from an economic impact perspective, it's incredibly important. Average daily rate, next slide, sorry. Average daily rate, still a bit of a struggle, and I'm sure that's a common theme amongst most, but I will tell you, in a sort of post-economic crisis era, hotels are really hanging on to rate, a lot better than they have before, so we're glad to not see that just kind of tank as it has in previous years. But even in 2023, we'll only be at 99% of 2019. 2024 will be at 104%, so some good growth there. Next slide is consumer sentiment. And you've heard a lot about this, I'm sure, in other sectors. But this information is provided to us by destination analysts, so it's really visitation specific and some real positive things to share. First bullet is travel confidence and intent reaching pandemic era highs. Now, I know we're already kind of making the assumption that this is post-pandemic, but we're still in it, so we call it pandemic era high. But again, we could call it post-pandemic. Next bullet is those in a travel-ready state of mind has increased to 84%. And even, earlier during the pandemic, that'd be at 30 or 40% or what have you. Last month, we're at about 77%, so we've seen a 9% growth in just 1 month in this travel-ready state. The next bullet is 87% of Americans are actively looking forward to traveling, and in other words, they're excited. That has also gone up about 10% to reach 87%. And then final bullet is nearly 80% of American travelers have already made plans for trips in 2022 with an average of 3.1 trips. So that's very encouraging for this sector. The next slide, talk about demand generators. And again, I said it already, it's an embarrassment of riches. And whether it's just Los Angeles, which is great, it's just Southern California in general. And I love the term that Robert used, sort of regional integration, absolutely critical. And that's the way we look at it too. It's all about Southern California, not just Los Angeles. But if you look at arts and culture, culinary, outdoor wellness, theme parks, retail and shopping and so forth, incredibly important and obviously always been very prevalent. Sports and entertainment, though, is where we really have some opportunities. Entertainment's the largest sector, and then sports is really the quickest to recover. And if you take a look at this timeline, we really have a timeline of iconic events that are going to be these demand generators that I'm referring to, all the way from the left, and that'll be the next button, at Super Bowl, which was just amazing. It was basically a week-long commercial with over about $500 million in economic impact in a week. So very important. And obviously, all boats rise with that type of a level of an event. All the way to the right-hand side, which is the 2028 Summer Olympics and Paralympics. So again, we're essentially, next slide, please, thanks, entering into an unprecedented decade of major events. I won't go through them all, but it is just a critical timeline showing that we have really a perpetual demand generation opportunity here, consistent demand throughout the decade. But it culminates again with the Olympics. Next slide with all these iconic events, you have to have the infrastructure to support it. And what we're looking at here, unbelievably to me, is about a $17 billion page in investments in the Los Angeles area. If we start with the top left there, that's SoFi Stadium, opened in 2020, as many of you know. That was a $5.5 billion project. Continue through all these here. I think LAX as a gateway destination is absolutely imperative that we have a world-class airport. Well, everybody's got a story about the experience at LAX and so forth, so we don't have to go into that. But with nearly $13–14 billion in investment for that airport, it is quite extraordinary. And on the lower left, you'll see the LAX automated people mover. That's part of the landside access modernization project, and the ITF, or the Intermodal Transportation Facility. Incredible changes, and if you haven't been to LAX recently, you'll see. Now, it's ahead of schedule because we were originally going to get the Olympics in 2024. In 2024. We're now getting them in 2028. Also, construction speed accelerated during the pandemic, so we're actually in a much better position for those projects to be completed. But it just shows you, again, from a job creation perspective, economic impact, and demand generators, we're in a real good position. Now, the last box there you'll see is the convention center expansion, and this is, again, a little bit of an Achilles heel where we have some vulnerability. The next slide, we are sort of underserved from a convention center perspective as it compares to our competitors or our friends in Orange County, for instance, much larger facilities. We need to expand. The impact of this expansion is great, and if it doesn't happen, if there's not a delay, I won't go through everything on here, it's about a $350 million nut. And unfortunately, through business environment, uncertainty, et cetera, it is becoming a bit of a critical area because we also need it expanded by the Olympics so that we can utilize it for some of that activation. But again, a little bit of a concern for us. The next slide shows citywide conventions, and again, from an economic impact perspective, it's absolutely critical that we fill the inventory of the hotels, create that compression, all boats rise, if you will. Again, not just in LA, but regionally. In this particular slide, you can tell 2020 and 2021 were obviously decimated from a citywide perspective. 2022, you can see the recovery. Typically, we're average about 22, 23 conventions per year. We got to 14. That's kind of net with cancellations. And then we were able to add with additional sentiment, meeting sentiment, another 3 conventions in the year for the year. So we're at least heading in the right direction. The next slide shows in sort of the same format as before where we were. And you can see in 2021, we were only 31% of 2019 levels. So obviously pretty drastic decline. But you can see also by 2024, we're at 108%. And that's non-expansion related growth. So if we don't get the convention center, we're still seeing this incredible growth from a citywide perspective. Now, I'm going to drill down a little bit more on this next slide. And it's a bit of an eye chart. I just wanted to pretend I was an economist for a half a second, but it's a bit of an eye chart, but believe it or not, this is kind of my Bible. Very, very simple, however. This looks at non-citywide meetings, so they're smaller in size significantly. Average rooms total is about 450 rooms per each one of these meetings. And if all I need you to do is go all the way to the right-hand side, look at that blue bar with 501. If you compare it to, this is February's numbers, if you compare it to last February at only 130, it's extraordinary growth. But more important is if you again use 2019 as a benchmark, that 501 compares to 97% of 2019 levels. So again, really encouraging demand from a small meetings perspective. And as soon as the masks come off and those restrictions are alleviated even more in April, we'll see that demand continue. I think more encouraging is trailing 6-month trending is about 90% of the same trailing 6-month in 2019. So really good information there and positive. Next slide, final, is really the key challenges. And this first bullet point is the new variants. I was listening to the radio on the way in, and there's a Deltacron, which is a a mutation of Delta and Omicron, so be careful. But that was, of course, not encouraging news, but we'll see, and I think it's inevitable. I'm not a scientist, but it's inevitable that we'll see some variants. Labor shortages, which we've talked about, particularly though in air service recovery and service delivery, which we're all painfully aware of. Next bullet is pace of recovery for business travel, group, and international. And again, our leisure travel, particularly in these last couple of years, has just been extraordinary. But in order to really for this sort of all boats rise mentality to work, we need business travel and we need group and international come back. So that's our big bogey. Visitor experience around safety, sanitation, accessibility. And again, just to put it mildly, California has experienced some brand tarnish, whether it's political affiliation or whether it's just perception of what's happening out in our great state. LA has as well. And again, hit it where it hurts is the homelessness situation. So we, as a DMO or destination marketing organization, have made community engagement an absolute priority, and coming up with solutions for homelessness is part of our charge. And it's a little bit different than it used to be. Always top line, always top line. Now it's more community driven, and we really appreciate that opportunity. And then finally, just status of the convention center. As I mentioned before, that's probably one of our vulnerabilities. Hopefully I didn't take too long. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Brian. And as a reminder from Pasadena City College, to prevent the Deltacron, Omadelt, whatever it is, please wear your mask when you're sitting down. And if you would like to advertise your venue or your location, as I'm fancy with Cal Poly Pomona. Next, we have Christine Sousa, who serves as the Director of Marketing and Communications for Visit Pasadena. She's gained so much wisdom during the pandemic and is extremely proud of the ability to be flexible and nimble and roll with the changes as they occur.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Christine Sousa, Director of Marketing and Communications for Visit Pasadena, and we can go to the next slide. And first of all, I just wanted to start with who we are. So our umbrella company is the Pasadena Center Operating Company, and we manage the Pasadena Convention Center, the Civic Auditorium, the Ice Skating Center, and today what I'll be talking about, the Pasadena Convention and Visitors Bureau, also known as Visit Pasadena. We're governed by a 15-member board of directors, and we're funded by a 2.89 TBIT assessment on gross room rentals. And our charge is to promote the destination as a travel and meetings destination. Next slide. And some Pasadena travel trends. I think Brian did a great job on giving you the overview of Los Angeles, and here's what we're seeing in Pasadena. Domestic leisure travel is trending back to 2019 levels. On the right side, you'll see our occupancy and our average daily rate for our hotels. And you can see that dark blue line is the 2019. That's what we're kind of tracking ourselves on. The gray one is the 2020. And then the lighter blue is the 2021. You'll see in January there was a little dip from the Omicron surge, but we're actually just got numbers that February is doing a lot better. I think we were at 65%. So we're already seeing a lot of recovery. Business travel is slowly returning as hotel rates, they're remaining pretty strong. So you can see that on the second chart. Though the Omicron surge slowed travel plans in January, we're seeing a lot of leisure travel optimism powering forward. And people are starting to regain a sense of normalcy. 82 or 84% of Americans have a strong excitement for travel, according to destination analysts. Next slide. And wanted to cover what we've been doing. So we're back to business in Pasadena. It's been a bit of a roller coaster, as you all know, and for about 9 months, California was the only state banning professional meetings in the country. So it was a big hurdle to overcome, but we're also just coming back, and we're telling people that we're back in business and we're ready for them. During that time, our team was really focused on how do we get through this, how do we reopen safely, how do we support the community, and how do we build confidence in our meeting planners and travelers. Our team served 90,000 meals during the pandemic to those that are in need. Our center was an alternative care center. It was planned and not used, fortunately. After 14 months, we saw the Pasadena Convention Center and Civic Auditorium reopened in June of 2021 and now has a full schedule of in-person meetings. The Pasadena Ice Skating Center reopened in April 2021 and is already exceeding pre-COVID numbers, so we're excited about that. A part of our message, we worked with the city to establish a Stay Safe Pasadena Cares pledge. It really was to demonstrate that the entire city, from our hotels, restaurants, museums, and attractions, we were ready to welcome back visitors safely. And we were proud of the fact that we're already 93% fully vaccinated. Next slide. We're also excited that this fiscal year we're welcoming 14 citywide conventions. And it's tremendous to see all the people coming back. We're seeing that people want to be back in person. They want to network, they want to connect and do business together. And we're really grateful because every attendee that comes to the city, the destination, means that they're making an economic impact. They're spending money in our hotels, restaurants, museums, and shops. Next slide. And then our team has a really robust travel schedule. They're back across the country and across the state talking about Pasadena is ready for meetings business. So our sales team is really busy right now. Next slide. And something that we've really been focusing on is our community. So supporting our restaurants and shops during the pandemic, making sure that they stay open. So we worked with the City of Pasadena Economic Development Department to really bring people and make sure that they know that Pasadena was ready for them. So we launched a Connect Pasadena Shop and Dine Pasadena directories for our website. We had about 300 businesses actually talked about there, and we also did some campaigns. We're open, keep us open, from Pasadena with Love, and a Pasadena 626 Day. Next slide. And it was really important to us to get back and bring back our visitors to the city. So we launched a tourism recovery advertising in time for the busy summer season. We were grateful to receive $475,000 in ARPA funding from the city of Pasadena to help us. They saw the need to support the tourism and hospitality industry, and we were really happy that they supported us. And this allowed us to advertise directly to consumers who were actively searching for travel using Sojourn, TripAdvisor, and Expedia. We also utilized platforms with Visit California and Dine LA. Next slide. And we're really excited that the Rose Bowl Stadium is back with a tremendous schedule. So they'll be celebrating their centennial this year, and they have a lot of music festivals coming. So we have 3 that are officially announced. Cruel World Festival, Just Like Heaven, This Ain't No Picnic. These are great for the community, and I know that there's a few that are in the works to be announced. We are also looking for international soccer, and UCLA football is going to have 8 games. So we're really excited that Rose Bowl is doing great right now. And then I just wanted to talk about our strengths, because this is what we're really focused on. I think the Rose Parade and the Rose Bowl game, I don't know how many of you woke up on January 1st and were really excited to see. I mean, it sent chills down my spine that it was exciting that we were back in business. And it was a really call to the nation, to the state, that we were ready to welcome everyone back. We have a fantastic assets to be talking about and promoting across the country: Rose Parade, Rose Bowl game, Rose Bowl Stadium. We have the Convention Center, the Huntington Library, Norton Simon Kids Space Children's Museum, Descanso Gardens, the Arboretum, Santa Anita Park. We have a global culinary scene. Downtown Pasadena, Old Pasadena, and our outdoors are phenomenal. So there's so much to bring people here. We have a city of sunshine and roses, so we're excited to bring people back. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christine. That was I do. I love Pasadena. Junior Talva'a. Yes? Yeah, pretty good. Okay. Who serves as the Chief Sales Officer at Visit Anaheim is next, talking to us about Disneyland and more, I'm assuming. Okay.
Thank you very much. This is a great order. I think most of what I'm going to say is going to build on what Brian talked about and Christine talked about. And both of what they said is absolutely true, right? In terms of visitation, demand, and all of those things. What I want to do is just build on that, right? In addition to what Brian said, in terms of us all working together, we've also been working with the state of California. And part of the work that we've been doing with the state of California is, as Brian talked about, California was one of the most restrictive states in terms of meetings and events, right? And so part of what we tried to do and get out to the marketplace last year, we went out to Chicago, which is one of our biggest feeder markets in terms of groups and convention, and then also Minneapolis, is to let the marketplace know that California is open again. It's open for business, it's open for meetings and events and convention, right? And so that's already, we've already seen some of the fruits of that labor, and I think this year we're looking at getting out to DC, Philadelphia, and New York, and probably up in the northwest side of the state, really focusing on that tech business, right? So a lot of what we're doing is to let the marketplace know and let the the business know that California is open back up. What I want to go through is I won't do a lot of numbers because I know Brandon's coming up behind me and he's going to overwhelm you with numbers, right? And as Brian talked about, not really an economist, although I try to play one on TV, right? But I'll show you a lot of pretty pictures, right? And I'll talk a little bit about demand. What's generating the demand for us? I'll talk a lot about convention business or business that's coming into Anaheim and Orange County, and then I'll show you a little bit of what we have on the calendar for this year, and then also leading into next year. So if you go to the next slide, go ahead and keep going. One of the biggest demand drivers for us is our convention center. 1.8 million square feet of meeting space as and the one of the largest convention center on the West Coast, right? So as you can imagine, with that big of space, we do a lot of convention. We are a convention destination. We are a leisure and tourism destination, right? The last part of the expansion for us just opened in 2017. Next slide, sir. And once this expansion opened for us, we saw an increase of production, increase of business for us about 35%. Right, in terms of convention. I'll talk about all of the numbers that we have in terms of total convention. But this is a big driver for us, especially in the convention business when we're competing with some of the major destinations out there that have massive convention centers. Right. So our convention center, I think we're on the top 10 of largest convention center across the country. Right, and continues to be fruitful for us in terms of that citywide or convention business. During the pandemic, if you want to go to the next slide, we also opened 3 4-diamond hotels. And this is important. I'll tell you a little bit more why this. But we opened this during the pandemic. JW, that you see there, over 400 rooms. The Westin, also over 600 rooms, and the Radisson Blu. This is important for us because prior to these hotels opening and also with our expansion, we were an association shop, meaning we're mostly medical association that came into our destination. With these hotels now, we are able to compete in the corporate side, right? So we're doing a lot of corporate tech business now. It's great because it's short-term business, and again, I'll talk a little bit about why it's short-term. The yield on it in terms of revenue and profitability is amazing. There's a little bit of risk that we take when we hold space for that corporate business, but these 3 hotels really allowed us to compete in that corporate sector, right? In addition to that, we also opened the Element Hotel, another 174 limited service hotel. And because we're in the backyard of Disney, this is really important for us, right? As the leisure travel starts to come back, right? So these are great products for us to continue to sell. And I mentioned a little bit about Disney. Go ahead on the next slide. During the pandemic, we also Disneyland also opened the 2 rides in there, or 2 parts of their park, right? And you can see there, right? That's again driving a lot of interest for us on the leisure side of the business. And what we saw, and you'll see that in a future slide, is a big part of our destination is driven by that leisure travel, right? Hotel occupancy for us during the pandemic when Disney was closed was around 10-18%, right? After Disney opened, that occupancy climbed to about 62%. Right? So, but some of the other future developments, as Brian talked about, some of the great future developments in LA County, right? OC Vibe, go ahead on the next slide. OC Vibe is a big development that's going on right now. Right? The timeline of this development is 2028 when the Olympics open, right? And you can see there the numbers of the number of things that are happening in this development. 2 hotels there. First phase of it will be completed in 2024. This is an amazing piece. If you go to the next slide, in addition to all of the hotels and outdoor theater and all of these things, it also connects. This development connects to the Arctic station, which is the train station. Really allows our visitors to go to LA, up to LA, down to San Diego, right? Utilizing obviously the mass transportation. So this is a big piece for us to sort of connect, as Brian talked about, connect the destinations together. Whether you're an international visitor coming in and you're landing in Orange County or in LA County, we know that these visitors are going up and down the coast, and this allows us to really connect all of the destinations together, and also on the group side of the business, right? This is a big development for us that we're working on, and we think it's going to change the marketplace for us. In addition to that, another future development that we were just talking about, Jennifer and I, is the Angels development, right? 153 acres. Hotels are also part of this plan, right? As well as office, retail. If you go to the next slide, give you a little bit of a big picture footprint. And these 2 developments, the OC Vibe or the Ducks, and then also the Angels, are close to each other, next to each other, in fact, right? Connected in between is the Arctic or the train station that I talked about, right? So, again, great developments in the future for us, and not to be outdone, right? Because Disney's in our backyard. Disneyland is also looking at a development called Disney Forward, right? Part of what they're looking at in this development is to integrate the theme parks with the hotels, right? I think when Disney first started, the way the city permitted was you had your hotels in one area and your parks in another area. And if you look at Disneyland outside of the U.S., their theme parks are really integrated into their hotels, right? So think about experience, and Disney's great about experience. This is a big development that Disney is now engaging in with the city of Anaheim, right? So I say all of these because I want to frame up the conversation in terms of what's driving that demand for us, both on the convention business or group business, as we refer to, but also on the leisure side of the business with the theme parks and the sports and entertainment sector that's being developed in Anaheim around OC Vibe or the Ducks and around Angel Stadium. So I'll get into the numbers now, and again, I'll hit this at a top line level. What you're looking at is visitor numbers for Anaheim only. If you look at all of Orange County, that's around 49 million, 49.7 million. But Orange County, you can see from here, we're expecting the recovery. We are expecting our visitors numbers to get back to where we were in 2019. And by the way, when we look at numbers, we're always comparing to 2019. We almost sort of scratched 2021 and 2020. Right, so 2019 is the year that we're chasing, and I'll frame that also up on the group side of the business. So on the leisure side of the business or the visitor side of the business, we expect to get to 2019 by 2023. So pretty aggressive in what we're doing there. Obviously, there's some things that have to go our way. International piece that Brian and Christine talked about is a big part of that factor. But we're seeing visitors coming back, and I'll show you that in the group side of the business as well. On the occupancy number, if you go to the next slide, I mentioned this earlier in terms of when Disney's down. You can see on the leisure side of the business, the light blue the part graph there is weekend business, right? And you can see the spike on the weekend business for us since Disney opened. I think all of our destinations took a big hit with Omicron and Delta, right? We came into this year in 2022 really thinking that we're going to have a decent year, not a great year, right? But we're going to have a decent year, and obviously with Omicron and Delta, we lost. Anaheim as a whole lost a lot of business in January, February, and a little bit of March, early March, right? And so we're trying to recover with that. We moved some of our groups to the back half of the year, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But you can see from here the impact of the variant. So we're keeping, as Brian talked about, we're keeping a close eye on the variant and variant conversations, and working with the state in terms of restrictions and masks. And obviously the latest news of coming down last week. Is it last week or this week? I can't even remember. But April 1st, we're able to take the mask off, and that's big news for us on the group side of the business or the large events or convention side of the business, right? If you go to the next slide, Brian talked about this on his side. This is group business lead production. This is a leading indicator for us. And we charted this all the way back to 2019. And I think like all of you guys, on the group side of our business and our organization, when the pandemic hit, we took our sales force down to about 10% on the, 10%, one person on the meeting side of our business, and 4 people down on the convention side of our business. And obviously, you can see from that the meeting side of our business, and let me define that. The meetings for us is groups that meet at hotels and do not need the convention center. Right? So what you're looking at here are leads on the meeting side of the business. Took a big hit during the pandemic, right? Nobody was planning events. They weren't sourcing leads. So you can see that, and so in the last quarter for us, we really started to restaff up on that side. As Brian talked about, we're seeing the recovery really coming back on the meeting side of the business and the sports side of the business. In fact, when we lost a lot of our business on the convention center in Q1 of this year, we filled it with sports business. Think about cheer, volleyball, gymnastics, all of these things. We filled our convention center with that business because those are the business that's the business that was still going on for us. The blue chart there is the convention business, or citywide is sometimes referred to, and you can see from that it's pretty flat right now in terms of lead production for us. We are staffing up on that side of the business, but that side of the business we are booking groups on average 3 or 4 years out. Right? So the focus for us is really now short term, 23, 24, 25 is what our focus is, right? And so we shifted the segment that we're going after to fill short term for us because on the citywide side of the business, we're usually booking out to 2027, 2028. We have groups out on the books in 2033, right? So we're really booking farther out. So now we're pulling that rank back or that range back into really short term, and I'll show you a little bit about all that information. If you're a hotelier in the room, you'll recognize this chart. Go ahead. This is same time last year charts, right? So same time last year to if you look at today, and again, benchmarking to 2019 for 2022, we're 28% down on number of conventions, and then as you get further out, you can see there that the work that we need to do. Right, in 23 and 24. And what's interesting, if you look at the room night piece of that, go ahead and click again. On the room night piece of that, we're further down, right, especially in 2022. And part of that is a lot of conventions that are coming in, we're not sure on the number of attendees. Right? And again, talk about that when I have a list of all of the conventions. We think we're going to get back on track in 2024. We're running a lot of our promotions. We're really being aggressive in terms of what we're doing. But the reality is every destination is being aggressive. Right? Christine talked about the industry shows. I leave here tomorrow to get out to DC for a show out there that hopefully will get us back on the association side of the business. And again, that's the piece for us that's a little bit dragging behind is the association. The corporate side of the business is starting to pick up for us, and that's going to fill the short term for us. And again, we're putting our sales team against that corporate side to really build the short term business for us. A lot of organizations have started during the pandemic, during the last 18 to 12 months, paused their sourcing or paused commitment. So we know that there's sort of that bent up demand that's there, and it start to come back, and we want to get on the front end of that. Similar to LA, a lot of our groups that canceled in 2020 and 2021 and 2022, we're starting to rebook. The challenge is some of those and most of those rebookings are out to 2027, 2028, especially on the association side, right? And so we're still working through that side of the business. If you're looking at PACE report, go ahead on the next slide. This is what we're looking at compared to this is where we're pacing compared to our PACE target, right? So our PACE target is set for recovery in 2024. You can see from here, based on our PACE target, we're only 3% off of where we need to be in 2024, right? So that's a big part of it. The blue bar graph you see there are tentatives that we're working, obviously on the convention center side. And I'm showing you convention center side of the business because that's really the business that drives us. On the self-contained or the meeting side of the business is very short term for us, right? Most of the business that we go after on the meeting side of the business, 73% of that, it's in the year for the year. meaning that if we get that lead, we're going to close it in the year for the year, right? So, but on the convention center side of the business, we're pacing well towards our targets for 2022, and I'll show you a little bit more on those numbers. 2023, we're behind. As I mentioned, that's a big focus for us, and 2024, we seem to be getting on track on that. And now we're starting to look at the outer years. If you look at the room night piece of it, and most of our groups, we are talking to them about adjustment of their forecast, right? And so some of our groups are adjusting down 20%, 30%, and I think if we get further out, those adjustments are getting smaller, but those adjustments are probably going to change by the end of this year, right? As the pandemic moves into an endemic, and people start to get used to getting conventions. I talked a little bit about, go ahead on the next slide there. These are some of the major conventions for 2022 for us, right? Natural Product just met with us. Usually this group comes in at about 89,000 people. You see their economic impact of those. 45,000 room nights for this show, right? They're usually 87,000 people. They came in at 60,000 people, or 60,000. I think they were forecasting 60. They probably will end about 57, 58,000 people. A lot of you guys are familiar with NAM. We moved NAM out of the first quarter, right, as part of our recovery, or as part of us moving groups around with the pandemic or with the variant. And so that show is now in June. And so the summer for us looks to be a busy time. And as you can see from here, every one of the months for us, we have a major convention, whether that's medical, corporate show here. And again, this is just some, we do about 55 citywides a year. Right, and total shows in the convention center is anywhere from 80 to 90 shows, and obviously, 55. The rest are remaining that are smaller size groups, less than 1,500 rooms on peak shows there. So we're a busy convention center in Anaheim, and we hope to continue to do that. Right, so you can see from here some of the shows that we have all the way out to the end of the year with a strong fourth quarter. And part of that is we moved a lot of those shows from the beginning of the year to the middle of the year. Usually for us, the summer months are months that we ratchet down on group business, right? Because Disney picks up, hotels yield a little bit better on the leisure side of the business. And then once we get out of August, we're back into that major citywide business again. So hopefully this gives you an indication or a big, view in terms of what's happening in Anaheim and certainly Orange County. And I think that's my time. Thank you.
You just can't talk about the San Gabriel Valley without our sibling, to the south of us, Anaheim. Thank you so much, Junior. And next we have Alan Wapner, the Mayor Pro Tem of the City of Ontario. And he is here also as the president of Ontario Airport, my favorite airport, by the way. Sorry, Brian.
All right, good morning. Hey, I appreciate the invitation to come. Any opportunity I have to thank all of you for your support of bringing our airport back to local control, I appreciate. Thank you all very much. Things are going pretty good for me until I saw that film from the Rose Bowl, and they had to show the 2006 Rose Bowl game against Texas by USC. I was there January 1st, 2006. Any of you watched that game? Did everybody know Vince Young was going to run with the ball? For some reason, our team didn't recognize that. So, well, what can I say? Next slide, please. See, I got him all upset. I don't have a PowerPoint, but see, now he's trying to find it. They're struggling. If you can see them, they're, oh no, what are we going to do? I think it was around 2011, 2012 that I was here presenting, and it was like midway in our struggle or our fight to get the airport back. And I'll never forget that day because I was there, as was Gina Marine Lindsay, who was the executive director for LAWA at the time. And she was all excited about LAX getting farmers market to the terminal in LA. And I said, well, you know what, Gina, I really want to say how much I appreciate you putting vending machines in Ontario. And that's really where things were going back then. And what I'd like to do is, since I was invited here both as a councilman a policymaker as well as representing the airport. I want to call just a little bit of a policy observation on what we're talking about on tourism and hospitality. Obviously, you've already heard of the large economic impact of this industry. From a policy perspective, there's very few revenue sources that we have at the local level that we can depend on. TOT, parking, sales tax are all generators from hospitality and tourism, so certainly Ontario as well as the rest of the region really looks at it. Having said that, though, I could stand up here talking about any segment of the economy. I could talk about logistics, e-commerce, manufacturing, even agriculture, because all those segments of the economy, including hospitality and tourism, from a policy perspective, all serve the same role. They are all means to the end. The end is what we provide to our community as far as quality of life. These are all generators of jobs, generation of demand on housing, and generation of revenue that we need to put right back in the community. So no matter where you're from, always recognize the importance of what you're doing in whatever industry you work in, because that's really what provides for our local communities. And I can't really underscore. Certainly tourism and hospitality, I think one advantage of that is there's immediate gratification, right? Because you're enjoying the amusement park or the convention or the arena or whatever it is at the time that you're generating the income for the community. And it's certainly an amenity that folks in your community as well as the rest of the region can certainly enjoy. So that's just my little observation on policy. Going into the airport, did I thank you guys yet for bringing back local control of the airport? Thank you all so very much. So you all know what we went through to get the airport, and we all had very high expectations of our airport. But I don't think any of us ever imagined that they would come so quickly. It was soon after we got the airport that we recognized the pent-up demand that was there while LA had control of the airport. We immediately got daily nonstops to Taiwan through China Airlines, the first airport anywhere in Southern California other than LA to be able to do that. That was very exciting. And that was just the beginning. Since we took over, there's many new airlines. We got nonstops to Honolulu now. Everybody was looking forward to Hawaii. Of course, we have JetBlue flying back to JFK again. They had left, they came back again. We now have other international carriers, Avianca going to Central America. Of course, Volatility is still going to Mexico. A lot of cross-country flights. Delta's added, I think, 2 more flights direct to Atlanta to get you on the East Coast. So you're seeing a lot more flights and a lot more airlines, a lot more opportunities. One of the commitments that we made when we took control of the airport is that we would be able to generate a lot of non-aviation revenue to bring the operating costs down for the airlines. And in fact, we just recently approved lower fees for all the airlines. What does that mean? That means increased flights, increased seats on the planes, decreased fares for our passengers, right? So that's what's exciting, and that's what we've been able to do. Now, how did we do it? It really wasn't very difficult. We had given the business plan to Los Angeles to follow. They chose not to, so we implemented our own business plan. There's about 800 acres on and around the airport that the airport controlled that in 50 years, LA did not develop 1 square foot of it. We've been really active in doing that. If you look during the pandemic, every airport in the country took a huge dive as far as passenger airlines, as did we. However, we are really fortunate is that we're a large cargo airport, one of the largest in the country. We're one of the few airports to host hubs for FedEx, UPS, Amazon Prime, and we're actually negotiating with another one to bring a hub here. So during the pandemic, obviously e-commerce increased. It helped balance out the negative loss that we saw with the passengers. That got us to the pandemic. Prior to the pandemic, Ontario was the fastest growing airport in the country. Since the pandemic, we're now the fastest recovering airport in the country. We're at about 90%. The good news, we're about 90% of pre-pandemic. The bad news is we're at 98% of pre-pandemic. And I say that because had the pandemic not occurred, we probably would have seen a 20, 30% increase. But we're happy with going back to where we were. We're continuing to drive. Got an incredible staff. Some of them are here today. They're just doing an incredible job there. If you visited lately, you'll see there's a lot of new concessions, food and beverage locations, retail, and you're going to be seeing a lot more of those coming in. We just signed a deal with Brewery X, which is a large brewery down in Orange County in Anaheim. And they're going to open a location at our airport. And what's really exciting about that is they're going to have, you all know that Topgolf just opened a facility in Ontario, right? They're going to have 2 Topgolf simulators in their establishment, in their brew pub at the airport that you can play golf, throw footballs, baseball. I don't know, it does everything apparently. It's going to be the only ones like that anywhere in the country. Our staff is also working on a plan to issue what are called gate passes. Right now, to get in the sterile area, you got to have a boarding pass, right? We're developing a system that you can show a gate pass to go up there and greet your family, use some of the facilities up there, the restaurants and things like that. That's something our staff's working on. Clear is now coming to Ontario Airport, so for those of you that like the expediency of Clear, they're coming to Ontario Airport. We have duty-free shops coming, so in case you're flying internationally, or even if you're just flying domestically, there'll be international duty-free shops that you can frequent. So there's a lot of things going on. The entire customer experience has just increased so much at our airport. And I'm sure all of you are happy with the airport as it is right now. You must be, because you're flying out of it, and we appreciate that. We really, really do. We find that it's extremely convenient. It's probably the fastest airport to get through, the best customer service, the best customer experience. So you're going to see Ontario continuing to go. And obviously, I'm sure going back to some of the international flights, you all heard about Norse Airlines, right? Non-stops to Norway. They've announced that Ontario will be one of their western airports that they're going to be using. So you'll be seeing direct flights to Europe that you can then travel outside Norway to visit. So again, a lot of things going on in Ontario, as all the airports. We recognize in Ontario that it takes a network of airports in order to effectively handle all the aviation needs of Southern California. So we work well with all the airports, including LA. You know, LA is always going to be there. We want LA to be there. But you have airports in Orange County, in Burbank, in Long Beach, San Diego. We all have to work together in order to drive the economy of Southern California. So once again, in case I didn't thank you for bringing local control of the airport, thank you all so very much. And, oh, I'm sorry, one more thing for my friend Lisa. The Metro Foothill Gold Line extension. Make sure you support that. We're looking forward to bringing that into our county, San Bernardino County. So if you can contact your legislators to see if they'll support increased funding to complete that project, we appreciate it. Where's Lisa? Lisa, you're welcome. All right, thank you very much.
Favorite airport indeed. Finally, we have Brandon Fainer, Managing Director of CBRE Hotels, Valuation and Advisory Services. Without the hotel industry, we wouldn't have the vibrant tourism industry that powers much of the San Gabriel Valley. Brandon.
Good morning, everyone. The only problem with going last is there are no surprises left. My presentation is going to be about that we are certainly well within the recovery phase, and if you would have told me 2 years ago I'd be standing here projecting the numbers that I'm going to, I would have called myself crazy. I mean, the decline in the hotel industry because of the pandemic was as bad as the Great Financial Crisis and 9/11 combined. But coming out of it, the pace of recovery has been like a rocket. Next slide, please. Not an economist, even though I will have lots of numbers to satisfy Junior, and a little bit of a hotel economist, but funny how consumer confidence keeps coming up. I mean, this is a trend we've never seen in the hotel industry. Usually spending and confidence go hand in hand. You see at the left side of the screen, but since the pandemic, some has to do with household deposits being at an all-time high, equity in stock market in the home prices, but consumers are still a little bit jittery, getting better every day, but not stopping them from spending on travel, hospitality, leisure services. Next slide, please. Hotel sort of has its own language. You saw some occupancy slides, you saw some ADR slides. RevPAR is just ADR times occupancy, makes everything a little bit easier to compare. In our world, the number one predictor of future hotel demand is GDP. I mean, it tracks with the hotel industry going back since 32. I mean, PKF, my former company that was bought by CBRE a few years ago, we started tracking trends coming out of the Great Depression because the banks had a bunch of hotels they took back and didn't know what to do with. So that's when we started our research, and you can track the fluctuations, and GDP is the best corollary. So we're already there and predicting strong growth over the next couple of years. I won't get into it. We heard a lot from Robert and from Bay. Next slide. But still, the hardest problem for the hotel industry is there aren't enough employees. And this isn't a new problem. I mean, going back to peak 16, 17, 8 levels when the hotel industry was having its best year ever, I mean, the industry was still 1 million employees shy of what it needed. So, I mean, this is going to be the challenge, as far as I see it, in getting back to stabilized levels of occupancy. That, are you going to have enough employees? They can't all be replaced by robots, maybe 1 or 2. But, it's finding good employees, training them, and keeping them interested in the job and showing a growth path. Next slide. Here's a nice one. Hopefully it doesn't make anybody's eyes cross, but basically it's tracking performance from the beginning of last year to this year. And you see the green bars getting closer and closer to the top on where recovery was. When Omicron was at its worst, when Delta was at its worst, and the left side of the chart, industry was down 40, 50, 60% relative to pre-pandemic 2019 highs. I'm just as guilty as the rest of the folks on the panel. We also track everything back to 19 because that's what we have. But you can see as we keep moving to the right on the timeline that things get better. And in fact, during a couple of the holiday periods, you actually saw demand greater in 2021 than it was in 19. Not by a little bit. You see July 4th there, sort of in the middle, and then on Thanksgiving, and then on Christmas. So I mean, very encouraging signs. Going forward, January slowed down a little bit, new virus, but seems to be picking up again in February. Still too early to say how geopolitical in Ukraine is going to fall out, and gas prices. That the pocketbook isn't immune. I mean, it's maybe you spend a little bit less on a hotel, but I think travel is an American given right, and people so much pent up demand that we're not anticipating a serious shock. Unless gas prices get to $10. Next slide, please. Talking about airports, that as you can see, basically after every major holiday, things have gotten better. And so today, even with a slight dip in January, I mean, airlines and airports are about 85% of where they were pre-pandemic, which is incredibly great because imagine there's still almost zero international traffic right now. So I mean, just the leisure industry alone and business coming back, small meetings, individual business travel coming back to be 85% of where we were before the pandemic started is just amazing. Next slide, please. Long term, Econ 101, supply and demand. Over the long term, we're not going to see as many hotels built, as we did, 6-7 years ago. That if the economy is running on all cylinders, if there is more demand for hotel rooms than supply, then my clients come and want to build hotels. But as you're going to see, long term, next 3 or 4 years, we're not expecting a building boom. I mean, there will be some increase this year just because hotel development, like everything during the pandemic, was slowed. Maybe you couldn't get to the construction site. Maybe your chairs and beds coming from wherever they're coming from were delayed. So it took a lot longer to open hotels in the last year and still, continuing into this year. But over the long term, we're not worried about supply. Just one of the many metrics about, why we're pretty bullish going forward. Next slide. Here's some of the reasons. Just the price of materials, steel, iron, lumber, way past what they've ever been. Next slide. And also wages. I mean, on the right, you still don't have as many people swinging a hammer as you did pre-pandemic. And if you can find them, you're paying, $3-4 more more than you were a couple years ago. So just, rising costs all put together, we think is going to keep the top on new supply, in the 3-4 years of the forecast period. Next slide. And this shows it in a different way that you'll see new hotel starts and openings really, back to 2013 levels, when, it was, not something we were real worried about. There was a big buildup, when things were good in, 16, 17, people started to build hotels. We're not going to see that, at least ramping up for another, 3, 4, 5 years until the market really gets back to stabilization. Next slide. And on a national basis, each of the last 4 quarters, the forecast has gotten better, and that is no different today. That we're projecting an ADR recovery again for the United States, at the end of this year, and occupancy and RevPAR, in 3 years. And what's really interesting to me is, the 3 recessions I've lived through, 2 or 3 I read about at hotel school. ADR has never come back before occupancy. It's always heads and beds. You sell the hotel, you get to a 65, 70, 75% occupancy, and then you're able to push rate. But this is one of the most incredible things I've ever seen. Next slide. Again, on a national basis, the industry will be about 93% of what it was pre-pandemic. The early winners, unfortunately for us, were places that had less restrictions. That the markets that did the best and are going to be at recovery this year, or perhaps already hit it, are Miami, Sunbelt destinations, the laggards on the right, markets with, big urban office presence, bigger convention centers, that San Francisco will be one of the last to recover just because, it's got a convention center that in a good year generates 1 million room nights plus. It has a high propensity of tech workers, who aren't going into the office yet, and some of the more stringent restrictions. So, but overall, 23 out of 42 above average, and the rest, will get there a couple years. Your San Francisco, San Jose's, it's probably a 2025 recovery. Next slide. And taking the local markets in consideration with the national, that Los Angeles predicted to hit 72% this year. And this is coming off of a number 2 years ago that was in the 40s, and also being able to generate strong rate growth. We're saying that average daily rate is going to be able to grow by 16.7%. And in a high inflation environment, we think of hotels as risky. Industrial building, you got to sell one lease, 10-year period, you're done with it. When things aren't as volatile, it's a pain in the butt selling hotel rooms. Each of your rooms, every time, 365 days. But in an inflationary environment, the pricing power is there. And again, going back to the pent-up demand, whether we call it revenge travel or, the great expectations for a spring break that, you didn't go on for the last couple of years, that, the pricing power is there for hotels. So we're predicting, strong, across the board for the 3-county region, but particularly strong here in LA County. Next slide. And then going into comparison of 23 versus 22, you'll see that LA County, doesn't have that much room to grow. That, it'll be incremental here in 23 and 24. It'll be the big conventions coming back. It'll be the international travel at the airports. And then that'll be the last piece that gets you from, prediction of 75% in 23 to, next slide, a stabilized level, back into the 80s by 25, 26, as we have, wonderful sporting events and everything's really firing on all cylinders. But, for the hotel industry in the San Gabriel Valley, it's awfully bright. And that's the story.
As Laura said earlier, I am Dr. Leah Dobson. I'm the Dean of the Collins College of Hospitality Management at Cal Poly Pomona. I'm very happy to be here today moderating this panel session. I just wanted to start a little bit and tell you about what's going on at our university. We started slow this semester. We had 3 weeks of virtual instruction that we hadn't planned on, but we're back on campus and we're going strong and we're ramping up, barreling forward as we move forward into the future. It's really great to see the students on campus and the faculty and staff back on campus, especially with hospitality management. Our students tend to be very social beings, And over the last couple of years, it's been really rough on all of us. If you're in the hospitality industry, you like to be engaged all the time. And so we've done our best on Zoom. We've all got Zoom fatigue, as I'm sure all of you do. But we're back on campus. We've got our restaurant open, restaurant at Kellogg Ranch, which is really great. If you haven't ever been there, please come by. It's a really great restaurant. And we're getting going. Actually, spring break is next week, so it's flying by pretty fast. So I wanted to thank all the panelists for everything that you're doing out in the industry and hiring our students. So thank you. So I'll start with my first question, which goes to the workforce issue. And Brandon brought this up about the challenge of finding good people in the hospitality and tourism industry in the workforce. So my first question is, how can SoCal hospitality and tourism attract and retain a quality workforce? What are the challenges and solutions? So I think I'll start with Brian.
Brian?
Really?
Yeah.
Are you sure about
Yeah.
Brian's going to solve all of your problems.
No, don't.
Yeah.
Test. Hello. Okay, good. Again, it is the never-ending question, and we, in our own right, we were a 160-person organization, so a small business, essentially. But during the pandemic, 2/3, at least, of our staff was furloughed or let go. So we're in that position now, too, where we're trying to find talent. And you know that it's bleeding out of hospitality and getting into other sectors and so forth, so it has been difficult. We realize from a marketing lens, the talent's out there and you have this sort of transferable skill sets. But when it comes to specific selling or particularly servicing in the hospitality area, it is difficult. The other thing that, kind of tongue-in-cheek, but we've always said if it wasn't for the customers, these jobs would be great. Well, the customers have really become an angry bunch, and it's been hard. And look, it makes social media. It's just a reality we're dealing with. We're seeing that wane a little. People are happier. We're beginning to see the drop masks and some smiles, and it's really a reality. But I sort of harken back to the way I was motivated. This industry is just amazingly rewarding. The engagement you have with leadership, customers themselves, counterparts, peers, what have you, are never ending. It's hard to convey that without the actual experiences, though. So we do struggle. We are making it a point to honestly leverage our academic partners. I think I alluded to the community engagement that we're really putting on the forefront. Well, that includes workforce development. We realize as a DMO, we have to be part of that. So a destination marketing organization, excuse me. So we're making that a part of it. It's difficult, though. You look at the economics of living in Los Angeles versus other potential residences or what have you. But we're seeing it. Beach communities are really coming back quickly, and it is a desirable, flexible environment from a scheduling perspective, and so that is obviously a real allure for many people. But I absolutely do not have the magic answer for that or a formula.
Well, thank you, Brian.
Sure.
I've heard that some of the hospitality businesses are having signing bonuses for hourly employees. Have you heard that?
Yes.
That's unheard of.
Signing bonuses. Yeah, absolutely.
So there's a lot of bent up demand out there in the hospitality industry. Junior, what's your perspective from Anaheim?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think for certainly there's a challenge in terms of the number of employees. I think for us, the expectation is different. Right? The expectation of the employees that we're recruiting now is coming in a little bit different. For example, a lot of we were hiring marketing people, sales people, some of our operations people, and they are looking for the opportunity to work from home versus coming into an office, right? The salary expectation is a lot higher than what we paid in the past. So I think for us, we're looking in terms of benefits that we can offer our team, the work from home piece. Today our office is open, or our team is coming into the office Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, right? So they can work from home on Mondays and Fridays. So we're looking at different benefits to offer to the new to employees and also the team that we have today. and trying to be competitive in the marketplace, because I think all organizations are looking at that as well, right? So, and that's not just in California, but across the country.
Can you speak to some of the challenges with Disney and their workforce?
In what way? I feel like this is a loaded one coming.
No. I just know there have been challenges in getting enough people to come back to work.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of that is also working with the unions to get the unions to agree to bring back their. I think Disney is, that's ongoing. That's beyond just Disney. Also, the hotels are working with that, right? So I think we're working with all of our local unions to bring back all of our team members, right? Whether that's at the hotel or at Disneyland. And part of it is what we talked about, providing different benefits to entice those workers to come back. And I think also the unemployment piece, as that comes down, right? Then we can be a little bit more competitive in the compensation piece.
Yeah, no, and Junior's exactly right. I mean, that we've had clients who have seen their housekeeping staffs, go across the street for 50 cents more an hour, $1 more an hour. But I mean, that's not going to be the end game. It's making it, a meaningful job. And that means something different to everyone. It could be work from home. It could be, promotion from, assistant manager, general manager. It could be on property, or subsidized daycare. It's knowing what your employees, get. That historically the hotel industry hasn't been high paid. And, it's cleaning up other people's beds and, other things. I mean, you have to make it meaningful, in the day and in the year ahead.
So do you see wages going up?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right, thank you. Christine, do you have something to add?
Well, I think for the PCOC, we were in a fortunate position where we, unfortunately, we had to leave. Some people lost their jobs during the pandemic, but we were, our executive team and leadership decided to keep their health benefits. So we tried to keep them whole for a full year. I think it was a good opportunity for us to tell people and our staff that we really cared about them. We wanted them to be healthy, kept them going, and then when we asked them to come back, we were excited to have most of them, nearly all of them, come back. So it's been great to see that. And I think it's a good culture, good benefits. There's pathways for moving up. I think it's something that the hospitality field we have to sell a little bit more, is that there's a lot of pathways that you can start in one side of things and start to move up. So trying to define that for young people, I think that's going to be a key challenge in the future.
Yeah, we find with our students and their parents, and just what is the attraction of the industry? Is there upward mobility possibilities? What are the careers they can have? And I think most people don't understand that there's very high levels of careers that can be obtained in the hospitality industry in different areas: marketing, accounting, front of the house, back of the house, all kinds of different things where you can move up very far. So I think that's something else that we need to, as an industry, get out there so that people see this as an attractive place to work.
Thank you. The first thing I would do is encourage all kids to go to the Collins School for Hospitality. I think that's really what we need, is a prepared workforce. Now, this is a problem. Every industry all across the country, I'm experiencing at the city level. We're very short for the first time in police and firefighters. In the airports, you'll notice wherever you travel, all the concession stands are closed. And that's not the kind of image we want. We're opening new facilities in our airport, but there's no one to open them to actually work in them, and it's really unfortunate. You're experiencing all through aviation industry. They have a shortage of pilots. Anyway, I think you're experiencing it everywhere, and it really is for the economists. I think that it's kind of slowing some of the recovery only because we can't reopen the facilities we want to reopen.
Thank you. Thank you all. Okay, I'm going to change directions here for a minute. Brian, you're up again. You brought up the 2028 Olympics. So my question is, how can San Gabriel Valley become more attractive as a visiting destination for the Olympics?
It's a great question. Right now, in fact, in March, the long-form accommodation agreements are in place for all hotel accommodations, and it's not too late. And so I would say if you have an opportunity to commit room blocks for 2028, which I know seems like forever away from now, but that is a key way to really engage. It'll guarantee that you'll have demand from a local perspective. One of the challenges is, and Brandon knows too, is our owner-operators and yield managers, the revenue managers, what have you, very apprehensive to commit to inventory that far out. The reality of it is, though, and never as extreme as a pandemic, we really don't know the bumpy roads that are ahead of us. So I would say put your money down on those guaranteed occupancies, if you will. We always say, shrink the inventory, build the base, shrink the inventory. You will then have the opportunity to yield further as a hotelier. Then as a community, and look, it's kind of out of our hands, but the IOC obviously selects venues and locations for their sporting events. Whatever you can do to be part of that and supply that, that's pretty much done right now, so I'm not sure the impact you can have. But from a hotel and an experiential perspective, you definitely have opportunity.
All right, thank you. Brandon, you want to comment on that?
Sure, and make sure you do give your room nights to Brian. But I'll be somewhat of a contrarian. Know for sure that it's going to happen the way it did in '84, and 6 or 7 years you won't remember what I said. But what we saw in '84, there was a bump from the Olympics. But really, the great year was '85. That it was just an incredible, billion-million-dollar marketing campaign for LA. So everyone saw Olympics in '84 on the TV and came in '85.
Yeah, it's a great point. Super Bowl is a great example of that. We had the same sort of reluctance to commit inventory because you're just uncertain. But the week-long commercial and then the halo effect of economic demand is really almost immeasurable. And the same thing happens pre and post Olympics. So that's why we're so excited to have them.
And I think from Pasadena, we're really excited just to use that, as they were talking about, is how do we promote the whole destination. And I think we have the Rose Bowl Stadium, and they're looking at bringing an international sport to the Olympics. But I think it's also just getting people to see Pasadena as a destination, or in the San Gabriel Valley, being able to see that there's so much to do here for that whole week. There's the Huntington Library, there's hiking, there's so much. Going back to my last slide, there's so many assets and riches here in the San Gabriel Valley that are going to be exciting to people from the international scale.
Yeah. I would add to that for Orange County, we have some events that are now for the Olympics going to be down in Orange County, right? And some are going to be in Huntington Beach, and obviously the Honda Center at in Anaheim. But I think for us, we're really selling through that, right? Because I think the visitors will stay and they'll get to all of the restaurants. So I would say make sure that you highlight your restaurants, nightlife, and all of those things. Because the visitors are going to go all over the county, right? Down in LA County, because there are some specific events going on in different venues, but visitors are going to be all over the county. So make sure that you highlight restaurants, some of the nightlife that are happening in your parts of the county. Because I think visitors will get there, and I think the transportation piece that we talked about, they're going to use some of the public transportation as well as rental cars and all of those things to get to all of the events.
Yep. Okay, great. Anybody else?
I'd be happy to.
Okay.
I think we need to use the Super Bowl that we just had, the Rose Bowl, and other events as warm-up events for the Olympics. It gives us the opportunity for all you folks that are in tourism and hospitality to start working together as a region, because we all know that every hotel room in Southern California is going to be booked. It isn't just Los Angeles. Certainly transportation is going to be tapped, and as we heard, it's really important that they put the venues. I know the last Olympics we had some venues in San Bernardino County that we do the same thing. But I think, again, this is the opportunity. It worked during the Super Bowl. The FAA, worked with all the airports. We had a lot of flights going to Ontario. So I think that we should start getting prepared for all that so we can all serve the needs that are going to be occurred.
Okay, thank you very much. There's some questions from the audience here. This is from Mount Sac. Given the low average wages in the leisure, hospitality, and tourism industry, which occupation should community colleges focus on in order to get our students jobs in living wage careers? And I had a similar question from Pasadena City College.
Hotel finance.
Of course.
Well, our airport's working with Mount Sac and a couple other colleges in developing folks interested in aviation industry. You know, there's just like you said, within hospitality, there's so many different careers that you can do in aviation. So I think it's important that the private sector work with some of the community colleges, let them know what your needs are, and then for those sectors of the economy that need folks, they need to work with the community colleges as well, so they can let them know what their needs are and develop the kids for that.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm going to pitch the convention center venues. I think there's a lot of venue management and event management positions that are great pathways for.
Very good. Yes.
Yeah, I think for us, a lot of our business, we're trying to figure out what our business might look like 2 or 3 or 4 years down, right? And so the skill set that we're looking for has shifted. So marketing is a big sector that we're going after. Social is another big piece that we're looking at because we're just marketing different than what we used to do. Right? The days of us buying ads is probably on the downside. Right? We're really looking at social engagement and engagement of our customers. So we want to look at that side. Brandon talked a little bit about this. Revenue management is a big sector that we're looking at, and especially working with a lot of our hotels. Making sure that we understand their language and we understand the kind of business that they want us to go after, right? So I think those are some of the sectors that where we're looking to ramp up on our side of the business.
I was only going to add, I think sales and marketing, top line is always essential. So you have to have a good sales team. I actually, as somebody coined, or I heard use the phrase learn by doing, and that's what I ended up doing from a career perspective is I entered into the industry really not really understanding what I wanted to do with it other than it was a source of income while going to school. And then I fell in love with it. So, and I started out in food and beverage and I worked hard and they were low wages. But again, there's a certain something about this industry that keeps you motivated. And then you begin to sort of identify where the high income opportunities are and you can navigate, I think, a little bit more effectively through it. But yeah, sales and marketing is another one.
Yeah, I think social media is a big opportunity, and I see students going into that and specializing in that. And also, I go back to the event management. That's become wildly popular across the United States as a focus of a hospitality management major. And I want to say to our community college partners, you could always send them to Cal Poly Pomona and study to get a 4-year degree in hospitality management. So we would love to have your students come, and we can help them focus also what they want to do when they graduate with a bachelor's degree. So thank you. Okay, one last question. So you've all talked about your own individual areas, but one of the questions I have here is, what are some hospitality and tourism growth opportunities specifically in San Gabriel Valley in the next 2 to 3 years?
Stumper. Yeah. Growth opportunities.
And hospitality and tourism.
Okay.
That may extend from your areas.
Wow. In specific sectors, or do you mean, development? That type of thing?
Hospitality
specifically. Yeah, boy.
There are no opportunities for San Gabriel Valley.
Give us an example.
I mean, I think the growth opportunity we've all been talking about is leisure has come back. I think the convention and business meetings have not, and I think we're trying to get out there and make sure that people know that we're open for business. So I think it's a great growth opportunity for us to get back out there.
Okay. I guess that's kind of where I was going.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I thought you maybe meant development, physical plant, that type of thing. I don't know. That I couldn't speak to. But yeah, absolutely. I think leisure demand, and we spoke to it a little bit, leisure demand is leading the way. And as go consumers, so go some of these other sectors, including business travel and group. And we're hoping then ultimately international. But right now, focus on the leisure traveler. And then I think it's a little bit easier to identify some of the meeting trends and so forth too. So this event management component you're talking about, or element that you're talking about, will be next in line, I think.
Yeah. And we're hoping that more corporations will send out their they're feeling more comfortable to send out their employees to go out to meetings and events.
Corporate budgets open up.
Yep.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. That's all I have for questions. Appreciate your time, appreciate your expertise, and thank you for coming today and being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Dobson, and our panel for today. Thank you so much. I wanted to see if Luis Portillo is available to close out the session for today. And thank you all again so much. You can return to your seats or stay, whatever. It's comfortable up here, too. Yes, it is.
I want to say thank you again to our panelists for joining us, but also thank you to everybody, all the speakers today. We had some really great information, very helpful. I want to say thank you again to Pasadena Community College for hosting us today, as well as Cal Poly Pomona for helping us put on the event, as well as Mount SAC for being our presenting sponsor this year. Thank you everybody for your participation. We hope you enjoyed it and wish you a great day, and hopefully we'll see you again next year. Thank you.